Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to day two of the third Sysmex India Scientific Seminar. I hope you had an enjoyable evening and re energized for another day of engaging and knowledge filled sessions. To commence today's program, I invite Dr. Aruna Subramanian, Director, Sales and Marketing and Customer Care Sysmex India, to deliver the day two opening address. Dr. Aruna.
Hello, everyone. A very good morning to all our respected doctors and our Sysmex colleagues. Thank you so much for being here this morning on a Sunday morning. It's lovely to see you all here. Yesterday, we had a extremely enriching session of a number of scientific information sharing from all our esteemed KOLs. I hope all of you learned from it and there was an exchange of ideas during all the sessions that you got to interact with each other and had an opportunity to network with each other. Post that, the evening was also entertaining. We had beyond diagnostics and beyond laboratory, we saw our customers as well as our colleagues on stage singing, a lot of showcase of talent. We found out that there was more talent in this group than we were aware of. So, a lot of secret butt singers came out and sang up here, which was fantastic. Thank you all for making the event interactive. A lot of our colleagues also rose to the occasion towards the end and enjoyed some lively dancing, including Garba. So, so it was a lot of fun. Thank you once again for that. We'll follow up today with further more interesting sessions. We have more of our KOLs here who are going to speak on additional to top up on what was discussed yesterday. And I hope all of you have a great session and get an opportunity to learn some more. And I hope we are able to this platform that we have provided for you adds value to you and helps you learn more so that you can have more takeaways from this and we can collaborate further on ensuring that we provide the best scientific knowledge out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aruna. I'll request all those sitting behind, you may kindly come in front and occupy the seats so that other customers who will be on their way, they may sit behind. Also to inform you some housekeeping instructions that we'll be checking out at 11 during tea break. So kindly get your luggages, baggages, keep at the concierge reception desk outside. They will tag your bags and on your return, they will hand it over to you. So, without this, now we're excited to continue our journey into the evolving world of diagnostics and laboratory innovations. Today's sessions will focus on future ready automated laboratory ecosystems, emerging airborne threats and clinical preparedness, advances in hematology, flow cytometry, and coagulation. We're honored to have eminent speakers moderate today's session. I invite Dr. Vidisha Mahajan, Consultant Hematology Section, Department of Laboratory Medicine, PD Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center. Over to you, Dr. Mahajan.
So, good morning, distinguished guests, respected colleagues, and esteemed delegates. I would like to welcome you all to day two of the third Sysmex India scientific seminar. Looking forward to an exciting day of future ready conversation where innovation and automation come together to shape the labs of tomorrow. So, our first speaker today is Dr. Mamta Soni talking about the future ready lab innovating beyond challenges, total lab automation. She is a senior consultant and head, Department of Hematology and Clinical Pathology, Apollo Main Hospital. She's impaneled as a lead and a technical assessor at NABL, faculty and thesis guide for DNB students. She's a member of editorial board of Apollo Medicine Journal. She has many publications in national and international journals and is a peer reviewer for these journals too. Her main area of interest is hemostasis, thalassemia, hemoglobinopathy, flow cytometry, and AI-driven CBC data interpretation and morphological assessment. Welcome, ma'am.
Yeah, so good morning, August gathering. It's always wonderful to come back to a Sysmex meet because we meet so many old and new friends here. So it's always heartwarming to be here. Though I came kind of 12:30 night, so I practically came today. but I wanted to make it. Yeah, so I go on to my presentation. I think we are already running the session late. So, as we know, the topic is why a TLA and why an automation. So that is the first question which comes to our mind is why this much of improvement in automation and digital solution, because everything comes with a cost. So we really need to know why are we doing this. So basically, this is a standard workflow, I would say, in any of the labs, any of a good sized lab. And this is what we were also some 6, 7 months back. The standard flow is that there's a lot of pre analytical manual steps. And this pre analytical, I'm talking about the steps after the receive of the sample in the laboratory. We are not going into the sample collection area, which is again still very much manually driven. This is the pre analytical which we have to handle inside once we receive the sample in the lab, and there are 18 steps involved into it, and 60% of the labor hour is spent in this phase. Of course, there is an analytical step which is the major, but it just takes 30% of the labor hours because most of us have good nice throughput analyzers. And then finally the post analytical phase, thanks to the LIS, the step is much more sorted. But still, if we talk about the post analytical processes, the archiving, the retrieval, and all of that, there are 13 steps involved, and 10% of the labor hour is spent into the into this. So now, the more we kind of do things manually, there is a chance that there is a staff fatigue, there is a staff injury, there is a blood spill, there's an extended TAD, there is a downtime of the equipment. So all of it, more the techs handle the tubes, greater is their risk. So even in a good sized laboratory, we are every day facing these kind of potential risks which can happen. So what do we do? Now we have to consider the objective for a technology gain automation. So we understand that the standard workflow is such that we are prone to so many errors. But then if we are going for a technology gain automation, which should be very clear in our mind that why do we want to go for it? So basically it is to extend the clinical capabilities, to improve the quality of care, to standardize care, to attract, retain, and develop workforce, increase the efficiency, reduce the risk and liability, burden of the overhead cost, improve profitability, stay competitive, and how can we leisure ensure that the reputation of the institution positively impacts the business results. So the reputation is equally important. So we have seen our standard workflow, which is very prone to risk, which is very prone to delays, which is very prone to non-conformances. We have defined in our mind the objective. Why do we want to go for a technology gain automation? Now it's important that we prepare our lab for automation. Automation is not something which can be escalated at, okay, today we have the resource, today we have the money, today we have a vendor partner supporting us, today we have the management asking for it, let's go for an automation. If we do that, it is going to be a bit of a disaster. So it's important that we prepare the lab for automation. So three questions which we should be asking ourselves. Do we have a standardized process in place? Because having the process standardized before going in for an automation, documenting all of it is in detail is critical for a successful automation. How frequently does the lab process change? Knowing the areas where frequent changes would occur needs a system with the flexibility to support the process. So we can discuss with our vendor partner that, okay, we are a newly commissioned lab, or we are a lab which is already mature in its processes. How much of the changes we are envisaging in our future operations, near future operations, a little later future operations, and accordingly we have to ask for the flexibility in what has been given to us. Otherwise, we get stuck with some element of a high-end automation which remains underutilized or which gets kind of redundant and old within no time. How much of the lab process needs to be automated? This is extremely important because I see around and see that there's an over enthusiasm into asking for an automation. We want this, we want that, but it is important that enthusiasm to automate process can lead to an over engineering and the laboratory starts looking more like a factory rather than a clinical lab. So automation of some specialty areas can make the process more cumbersome. So it's important that we see what should go for an automation in the first phase, what should go in the second phase. Say, for example, if you are putting a coagulation in between a chemistry and a hematology, or before chemistry, somewhere there, it is a major bottleneck because the centrifuges get very busy with the coagulation samples because the centrifugation time is much longer, and it creates a lot of congestion and a lot of stasis for the serum samples. So be very wise into what you are asking for automation, when are you asking for automation, and where the automation should actually come in. So, just to summarize, standardized lab processes, flexibility of the future lab growth, and simplification of the work within our control are the three key elements which we should look into for preparing our lab for automation. This is important, and it's one of my favorite slides. If you automate junk, you get an automated junk. So, the first rule of a technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify efficiency. But we have to be mindful that the second is automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. So, first we have to be efficient in our place, put the automation there, and that magnifies efficiency. It's also important that we do this step by step, leverage technology to eliminate bottleneck journey of continuous improvement. Most of us here are somewhere running into automation, but yes, a new lab with 10 samples, less than 10 samples. I think we have four steps. How do we do a technology gain automation? First is the lab crawls where there are manual operations. There are standalone analyzers. They're all automated, but standalone analyzers, and it is quite a lot labor intensive, and those labs are able to do that because the volumes are less, the tat is not very pressing. Then we walk in our journey towards automation where there we have integrated the immunoassays and the clinical chemistry analyzers on a TLA. Introduction of lab IT is there. It is little bit less manual cumbersome, but yes, next step is to run towards automation where most of us would be, which is a task targeted automation, focus the bottlenecks, automate the manual error prone steps. So find out, put the quality indicators in place, find out where the errors are happening because of manual interventions, automate those steps, discipline the antagonists, and comprehensive IT with a auto verification, with or without auto verification, I would say. And finally is the step where we are flying towards automation, where there's an end-to-end total lab automation integrating multidisciplines. It is multidisciplinary and there is a comprehensive IT solution with auto verification. So these are the four steps where we are leveraging the technology to eliminate bottleneck journey of continuous improvement. Now I come to the Apollo CRL story. So the CV was a little outdated. I know I'm a Sysmex speaker for years together, and my CV with Sysmex remains the same for years together. But yeah, so I kind of had the Apollo Central Reference Lab, which we have created 6 months back. So the vision of our Apollo Digi Smart Central Reference Lab was that we needed an end-to-end multidisciplinary automation. We wanted to automate the digital integration, AHLL and AHEL. These are two sister concerns. One is a retail business and the other is a hospital business. And the central reference lab was going to cater to both the retail business as well as the hospital business. And the IT solution for both was different. So one we are working on IT DOS, the other one was on Med Mantra. Now, how to integrate both of it so that the patient service doesn't get affected, because IT is something what the patient sees in their reports. So this was a big challenge which we had, which was one of our design goals. Then of course the scalability, though we were already on some 6,000, 7,000 tubes per day, but still we were envisaging that with this kind of automation, the vision and the objective is to go 10 times at least. So a 10-fold future-proof design with a redundancy in the design that, okay, something falls, then something gets, something is there for it. The contingency plan has to be in place, and the reduce the non-value add processes and define clear performance outcomes. So the performance outcomes which we defined from day one was the speed, the quality, the productivity, the staff, and the clinician satisfaction. And we were going to automate the pre-analytical, which was centrifugation, sample quality check, decapping, aliquoting, sorting, and then the analytical, consolidating the four disciplines on the track reputation with a Six Sigma performance, and the post-analytical also, which was capping, archival, storage, retrieval, and disposal. All of it together on a digitally and physically connected island of automation. So with this design goals, we started our journey towards the TLA. Also, a little bit of information on how are we placed. So there is this. I don't know if I have a pointer. Do I have? Okay, so you can see that building in the center, which is the lab, which is the central reference laboratory. And those blue islands are actually the big Apollo hospitals in the city of Chennai. So we have four big hospitals. One, of course, is the main hospital, and then we have a cancer, then we have a proton, and then we have a specialty at Vanagaram. So these are all 500 plus bedded quaternary care hospitals where the transplant is also happening. So those four hospitals, then a lot of smaller hospitals, as I said, the retail. So we were having the AHLL collection centers, the pickup points, these rider boys, all of it, and this central reference lab was going to cater to all of them. So you know how much of a variation in the type of sample which we were going to get, in the topography which we were going to cater to, the exigencies and the contingencies which we were going to address to. It was just a huge task. And this is just the Google Map thing, the most further hospital from the central reference lab is 14.6 kilometer, which in a metro city can be quite a distance. And the minimum time which has taken as per the Google Map is 50 minutes. So 50 minutes is the minimum time when a sample can be transported from one of the hospitals to the central reference lab. And I had to factor this 50 minutes into my analytical TAT so that the overall TAT does not get affected. So our decision criteria and key metric of evaluation, the reference site visit. So we did a lot of work on it. The decision criteria was improving criterion where the workflow integration and total analytical coverage has to be there. The automatic level, 80% of high volume testing is automated, freeing technical staff from complex tasks. This is what we wanted to achieve. Then the criteria was error reduction rate, percent decrease in manual pre-analytical errors. So CCM, which is the middleware, provides a unique feature with automatic sample quality check at no additional cost. And 98% reduction in manual pre-analytical errors was our goal. TAT and clinical impact, of course, TAT becomes the single most important criteria for a clinician to decide whether your lab is good or not. So faster result delivery leading to quicker clinical decisions. 90 percentile TAT should be less than 90%. So 1.5 hours. Otherwise, most of the hospital driven laboratories have a 4 hours analytical TAT, but our target was less than 90% because the time which has gone into the logistics of transportation. Scalability and future proofing throughout capacity buffer and capacity utilization was to be factored in because the volumes were going to grow. So we did a lot of work. There were some 4 to 6 multiple site visits, both national and international. We went to China, multiple government labs, private labs, because China is the hub for total lab automation. I mean, you can see there are 4 or 5 TLAs in one single laboratory. So they have practically everything. So it's one of the best places to visit. We went to as far as Kazakhstan to see something. Of course, a lot of good labs in the country, because that is what was going to help us decide which automation we should go on. So then with all that work, of course, this presentation can go out throughout the day, but I have a limitation of time. So I'm just going to introduce our Apollo DigiSmart laboratory. So we can see here the Apollo DigiSmart laboratory, it seamlessly integrates 4 laboratory disciplines, that is clinical chemistry, immunoassay, hematology, and serology into a digitally unified automated track system, which helps us to consolidate the workflow, huge work volumes in line with the lean design thinking. And also there are 2 pre-analytical units with the bulk sorter. The first one here we can see Cobas bulk loader and automated pre-analytical solution. Two of them. I think we are one of the labs in the country which has 2 pre-analytical solution, because I did not wanted a congestion happening for EDTA sample. So for EDTA sample, which caters to CBC and HbA1cs, we have a separate pre-analytical unit. And for the serum samples, we have a separate unit. And there's a 4-lane CCM highway. We call it a CCM highway, which you can see it in the center. Yeah. So this is the highway, as we call it. I think Cobas chemistry manager, clinical manager, something. This 4-lane CCM highway separates the hematology work area, the EDTA work area, I would rather call it, because there are XN 4 of them here, and then there is a TOSO HbA1c analyzer, and then there is a SMS also in between. So we have four XNs on the track, two side maker and stainer, and one A1C. So it's a mirror image. So that if the one line goes down, the other one is there. So these two, this is entire EDTA workflow area. This entire thing is the chemistry workflow area, and the highway separates two of them so that the technicians do not have to manually intervene anywhere else. And then employing advanced robotics, high definition cameras, bespoke algorithms, the Digi Smart Lab actually optimizes processes, mitigates errors, and accelerates the diagnostic timelines. There is an integration with Navify Lab Ops, which is the middleware, which helps us into a automated decision supportive recursive workflow, which actually reduces manual interventions and the errors and the delays which may be associated with the same. And we do not end here. We have a post analytical unit here which does everything after the analysis. Everything gets automated, like recapping and archival and retrieval and stuff like that. And this post analytical archival unit, this can host 27,000 tubes at one point of time, and it is one of the biggest in Asia. So this is the shortest way I can describe the TLA at the CRL, and then we move further on other matrix. So process excellence with lean mindset, eliminate waste and error reduction. That has always been the objective. And we can say that we have process simplification and improvement has happened with 6 pre-analytical and many sub-pre-analytical steps, 3 major post-analytical steps, 9 main workflow station automated with Roche automation and Navify Lab Ops, and a total of 56 associated errors have been eliminated. And these are the main ones, and there are a lot of sub-analytical steps which have also been automated. The digital architecture, the IT, as I said, is very interesting because we cater to two kind of verticals, the diagnostic verticals and the hospital verticals. So we have AHLL LIS on IT DOS, which is on AWS server. There is a hospital MedMantra, which is on Azure. So we have actually two servers. The samples flow on each of the servers, and then they integrate at the middleware, which is the Navify Lab Ops, for processing. And after the processing in the post-analytical step, they just go their separate ways. So you can see that it is a bidirectional flow from both AWS and the Azure. So they come here, the samples come here, they get registered, the retail samples, they come to the Navify Lab Ops, the entire processing happens here, and then they go back to their respective, from wherever they came, the results go back, it gets thrown back at the same time. And it's very complex then, what we see here, because, AWS doesn't want draft report, hospital wants draft report because in the night, immediate clinical decision has to happen. So all of it is being taken care of with this middleware. Now we can go on and on to say that, oh, we have been doing this and we have been doing that and we are so successful. But then there are always objective matrices we have to put in place to show ourselves and to the staff and to the management and to the patients that, we are actually doing how we are doing. So increased workload post automation. We did some comparative study between October 24 and 25, October 25, and today we are in January. The workload has improved even further. And we have found that a minimum of 21% to a maximum of 40% increment in the work volume has happened. And I must add here that we were already a very busy laboratory because it was catering to Apollo Main Hospital. So we were always having some 1,000 plus CBCs and 5,000 tubes per day. From that denominator, we have improved to 40%. And today, we cater to around 12 to 13,000 tubes per day with 15,000 on the peak days. And the tests which we process are around 35,000 per day. And this doesn't impact the TAT adversely. So the impact of TAT has also been very positive, and an improvement up to 50% improvement in CBC has been noted because of the workflow which we have introduced over there, the contingency design and everything. So CBC TAT has improved the maximum, which is 50%, and it is average 46, 45, 42, 40% around improvement in the TAT. And analytical TAT has been done. Patient safety and quality checks through automation and digitalization. There are so many metrics where we can see the TLA, but this was, I think, close to our heart. So I'm presenting this. Before automation, we do a visual or the manual HIL that, okay, this looks lipemic, this looks hemolytic, this looks, inadequate. But with this pre-analytical unit, we can do it through a laser. And as I said, high definition cameras, which help us to kind of detect the insufficient samples and the HILs more accurately and much faster. So this is the data which I got. So we can see that the insufficient samples have always been much below the kind of the international benchmarks, because we use standard quality vacutainers. The phlebotomists are very well trained, so we do not have that problem of underfilled or overfilled tubes. But yes, hemolytic samples will always be a challenge for any hospital driven laboratory, because ICUs and nursing collection sometimes happens. And we have been able to get this data from the pre-analytical unit. Somebody is calling somebody. And getting that data, getting very objective data, we have been able to train the staff that, hey, this is what I mean, we were doing it always, and all of us, I think, are doing, where we are checking on the repeat samples, we are checking on the cause for repeat samples, we are going back to the people who have done that, doing the RCA kappa. But when you do it automated, you do it faster, you do it more accurate, and you do it with more reliability. And we can see that, it also has helped us to improve our indicators on error reduction. So from 4.5% peak, we are today on 2.1 to 2.2%, and it is ever improving. Productivity outcomes, of course, when so much of investment has happened, we also need to tell them that how is the staff being utilized. So I would say that there were 8 hospital units which were all coming into one, and not even one single staff was laid. Hospital is a big it's a big setup, so we can consume a lot of all the secretarial staff, because with so much of automation, we didn't need it typing and stuff, so they were absorbed in the hospital work. But still, we started with little bit of a surplus. When the resignations happened, we did not do the replacements, and so it was not at all negative. The staff was taken up very, very wonderfully, and they are all extremely happy now. And we can see that the productivity from has improved by 2.1%, 2.1 times. So somebody who was doing 75 samples a day, a full term employee, today does 157 samples because of the automation. And the test also, 195 tests per staff has gone up to 345 tests per staff. But it is not so that the staff is overworked and they are unhappy, because now they are doing 2.1 times of what they were doing earlier. We did a staff satisfaction survey also with pre and post automation solution. The numbers were 40, because these were the people who were on the TLA, and encouraging results. Almost 85 to 80% staff is extremely happy with what they are doing today, with the automation, with the change. So that is remarkable. And this was the survey which was done when we were still kind of settling the operation. Today they are much more happier, and I'm sure this would go to 95% and 99% in no time. So this is one of the, I would say, penultimate slides, advantages and limitations of automation. There are a lot of advantages which we have seen, but then there are so many limitations also. But if we are prepared for it, as I said earlier, if we have a standardized process in place, if we have prepared our lab, if we are not too enthusiastic into getting the automation, if we are ready to work with the automation each day, if we are ready for the multiple trainings which we have to give to the automation, all these will fade away. So slowly we can see that all the limitations, they will go off, and only the advantages remain. So the future is ongoing technological innovations coupled with current scenario, profoundly driven by cost containment policies, will promote further division of lab automation in the foreseeable future, because that is what the future is. And most of the developed countries who are focusing their kind of policies on diagnostics are going for automation, because the one size fits all paradigm does not apply to lab automation. Selecting the most suitable and, I would say, flexible model of lab automation is a challenging and time consuming enterprise, which is now an integral part of a lab leader's duty. So you saw how many site visits we did, because one wrong decision, I mean, you will have 4 or 5 vendor partners providing it, but we have to see what suits us the best. All of them are good. All of them have advantages. All of them have limitations. But what works best for us is what we have to find out. Since there are advantages along with limitations, accurate analysis of all these should guide lab leaders to configure a local solution suitable for meeting current testing needs and handling future demand. So the lab leader's duty is going beyond lab. And I always say this, I say to my team also that, we are so much happy looking into the microscope. Some of us don't come out of our microscope. Some of us don't come out of our tables. Some of us don't come out of our cabins. Some of us don't come out of our labs. But then, as a lab leader, we need to do that. Microscopy is reflects to us, but it is the other part of it, the P&L, the finance, the purchase, all of it, which we need to learn for the best of the patient care, because as clinicians, that always remains our primary target, that our patients and our clinicians should be happy. So doing what the patient needs next is what is a lab leader's duty. We have to envisage today what the patient will require tomorrow and be prepared for that. And this is my last slide. It's a lot of gratefulness towards the leadership because, they empowered us to do this. But most important part is all the HODs, all the doctors, all the staff at Apollo Central Reference Laboratory who actually relentlessly and tirelessly work each day to bring this vision into reality with a pursuit of excellence, with all the positivity and with all the heart and the soul. So thank you for your patient hearing. It's always wonderful to be here. And questions, if any, are welcomed. I hope I was in time.
Nice. Very nice. Um, Thank you, ma'am. And after Dr. Sujay Prasad's talk yesterday and Madam's talks today, I believe the future is here and to stay. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Carl Shu to felicitate Dr. Mamta Soni. We will have the question answer session later in the day. So, with air quality index and airborne disease dominating our conversations, the next topic is by the keynote speaker for the day, by Dr. Lancelot Pinto. He'll be talking about airborne in a hyper-connected changing world, threats and opportunities. Sir is a consultant pulmonologist in the Department of Respiratory Medicine at Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center. He's a member of Maharashtra State Anti-Tuberculosis Association and a visiting senior fellow at Artha Global. He's also a faculty at MICOR, program by the American Thoracic Society. He has received multiple awards of recognitions for various presentations in Indian and international respiratory conferences and has received many fellowships and grants. He has 60 plus publications to his credit in peer-reviewed journals. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Vidisha, for that very generous introduction. I'd like to thank Dr. Shehnaz Khodaiji, the team at Sysmex, led by Monisha, who's been in touch with me and has been very proactive with inviting me for this conference, and Mr. Prabhakaran as well. I realize I'm an outlier at this conference, but hopefully the topic is interesting enough because it connects us all, and hopefully I can keep you engaged for the next 45 minutes or so. I'll be speaking about how being airborne in a hyper-connected, changing world has come with a lot of new threats. But at the same time, we live in a world where there's a lot of opportunity because technology has made things a lot easier for us. So let's begin with a story. This is a story from 2007. This is on Larry King Live. The gentleman there became popular and famous enough thanks to a medical incident that he made it to mainstream television. So, what's the story? This is Andrew Speaker. He was a 31-year-old male, had a rib injury in late 2007. As part of the workup for the rib injury, he had a chest radiograph. The radiograph showed no fractures, no injury as such. But what they found was a right upper lobe infiltrate, something that's extremely common for us, but obviously raised red flags in the US. On March 8th, he had a bronchoscopy, was found to be smear negative. But on April 23rd, his culture grew MTB. On May 1st, MDR-TB was confirmed. And on May 10th, the doctors met with the family, told him that he should cancel any future travel plans that he may have. He was about to get married. He had a flight for the 14th. And on the 14th, when the CDC sent teams to find him, he had vanished. They had no clue where he had gone because he had preponed his flight tickets to May 12th and he flew off to Europe to get married in Santorini after a flight to Paris. So here's a gentleman with MDR TB, taken a flight to Paris, then gone to Santorini and got married. He went on to have a honeymoon in Mykonos and then in Rome. And then finally, when they managed to trace him and find that he is in Rome, he was advised to seek treatment in Rome because he had MDR TB. Getting a flight back again would be a challenge. They hadn't figured out how to get him back. They even tried things like getting the US Air Force involved to try and get a special flight, but they didn't have isolation facilities available. Insurance refused to cover an air ambulance, so that wasn't an option. And Andrew Speaker suddenly realized that he was in the middle of Italy. His government was telling him that he had to get treated locally. He was not allowed to fly back. And he panicked. He flew to Prague. From Prague, he went to Montreal and then eventually drove back into the US. This is while there was a lookout for him. So despite the lookout, he managed to do all of this. Apparently, when he crossed the border at Montreal, the guards out there noted the lookout but said he looked fine and healthy, so they let him pass through. This led to the first federal quarantine order in the US since 1963. Right? This was a big deal for us working in India. I mean, I have patients come to me on a regular basis saying, I have MDR TB, but I have no leave left. I'll lose my job if I don't go back to work. What do I do? I have parents of kids sometimes coming and telling me that my child has an exam. It's the most important exam, just 5 days. And after that, they'll be isolated at home. What do we do? And we really have no systems in place to isolate anybody. We know that it's an impracticality that we have to deal with. Where does the word quarantine come from? So in 1377, centuries ago, on July 27th, the Major Council of Dubrovnik passed a decree that visitors from countries that had experienced the plague had to be isolated on an island nearby. They had a bunch of uninhabited islands which were defined, and they had to be there for 30 days, and this was called Trentino. The Italians decided that 30 days was not enough. They said it has to be 40 days, and that's how the word quarantino came into place, or quarantine. The world has changed a lot since that point of time. We know what our experiences of quarantines had been. We know the disasters that happened during COVID, where people had to be checked into hotels for 7 days and all sorts of stuff that we experimented with, none of which possibly made a real dent in terms of transmission. What is this hyper-connected world we live in? About 10 to 12 million people fly every day on commercial flights worldwide. And I found this fascinating. At peak hours, there are more than 1 million passengers in the sky simultaneously. So you just look up in the sky, there are 1 million people flying at a given point of time. In addition to that, we have mass gatherings. We know the Olympics, for example, brings people from all over the world into one given city at a given point of time. We have religious gatherings like the Hajj. We have the Kumbh, where thousands and thousands of people come together in extremely crowded settings from all over the world, carrying whatever organisms, whatever disease, whatever infections that they may have at that point of time. And yet, despite all of this knowledge, our understanding remains quite primitive, right? So this was from 1918, which said if you have colds, influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis, it's all spread this way, which is through droplets. So you just cover your mouth with a handkerchief and you'll be fine. You will not spread it to others. This was the communication. This is just taken from a random website, but I guess a lot of people have the same communication, which said that coronavirus is spread in sneeze or cough droplets. Make sure to cover your cough or sneeze with your sleeve or a tissue Please use tissues in a bin, wash your hands, clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces. Right? So, despite all our understanding, the communication around COVID was all about droplets. And there's a whole bunch of literature out there as to why we stuck to this droplet theory. And a lot of it had to do with logistics, that if they admitted that it was airborne and it was not droplets, you would have to provide N95s. There was a shortage of N95s, so let's not go down that road. Also, this consideration that the communication in the middle of a pandemic should not change. So if we started off saying droplets, if we suddenly say airborne tomorrow, people will think that we know nothing, we will lose trust, and therefore we stick to this droplet theory of transmission, which was proven to be clearly wrong. So this was a paper which was highly cited, which basically showed us our knowledge that the virus, which was SARS-CoV-2 virus or COVID, which is commonly known, the disease known as COVID, was clearly airborne. And they came to this conclusion from multiple realizations. There were choirs of singers, for example, where everybody got infected. Nobody was coughing or sneezing, but just the act of singing was generating a lot of particles and causing infections. In crowded spaces like buses and restaurants, there were huge outbreaks, making them realize that it doesn't have to be a droplet spread, but it was airborne. But this is something that aerobiologists or scientists had been saying forever, but were pretty much ignored. It's a good article in Nature talking about why the WHO took 2 years to say COVID is airborne, despite the knowledge, possibly right from the word go, that it was. I like this quote. It's from a book called Airborne. Again, a very interesting book about aerobiology and our understanding of how things move through the air. And it says, I began to think about the air differently as a gaseous ocean in which we all live, which infiltrates our bodies, which our own bodies then transform and return to the great transparent sea that contains exhaled viruses that can then be inhaled. Right? So if we stop thinking of ourselves as being this egocentric version of the world where we are at the center and viruses are just around, versus thinking of ourselves as being in an ocean of air in which viruses are using us in the way they want to use us. And if you think about our symptoms, things like cough, for example, is the virus using us to ensure its survival rather than we thinking about our immune systems in place? The other concept that's quite interesting when we talk about the air, we keep focusing on infections, we keep focusing on organisms. But what about earth to lung transmission? Let's talk about another interesting story. This was 1977 in April. This was in California's San Joaquin Valley. There were years of drought followed by a massive dust storm that occurred. Over the next few weeks, hundreds of people developed severe pneumonia-like illnesses. Many of these were previously healthy. Some of them were hospitalized and a few died. But what was fascinating here was that patients had no contact with each other. There was no common water source. There was no food exposure. There was no travel history, right? So the traditional things that you think of when you see an epidemic, when you see a whole bunch of people falling sick together, is you think obviously there is some person to person transmission going on. The only shared exposure for all these individuals was breathing the air after the storm, and the culprit turned out to be coccidioids, a soil dwelling fungus whose spores become airborne during dust and sandstorms. When inhaled, they lodge deep into the lungs and can cause an acute fungal pneumonia and sometimes disseminated disease. So the storm effectively was a fungal aerosol generator, right? So that's what the storm did. There was no human to human transmission, but the storm generated these spores which are lying dormant for God knows when, and that's how the inhalation happened. In the last 2 decades, similar outbreaks have followed dust storms in Arizona. Military personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan developed similar fungal pneumonias after sandstorms. And unlike viruses, what's important to remember is that fungal spores are environmentally hardy. They survive heat, UV, desiccation. They wait sometimes for decades until they are disturbed. What's important to note here in this context is that very often fungi get generated or aerosolized when demolition of buildings occur, right? So when there's an example in Montreal where I trained, where during the Olympics, they saw a huge rise in fungal pneumonias simply because an Olympics was being organized. So there was a lot of make and break happening in the city, leading to a lot of aerosol generation at that point of time. So let me talk about two of my recent patients, which made me think again about what potentially could be happening. So let's talk about the first patient. She's a 72-year-old female, had osteoporosis and diabetes, but was very well controlled with an HbA1c of 5.7. She came with fever, cough, yellowish thick expectoration, and dyspnea for 10 days, and we labeled her as having a community acquired pneumonia. So if you see the first X-ray on the left, there are infiltrates both in the upper as well as lower zones, but more so on the upper zones. She had bilateral post-Krebs expiratory Vs. She was started on IV cefoperazone sulbactam because of a recent hospitalization due to a humerus fracture. So we thought we needed to go higher rather than amoxiclav, and was given doxycycline. After 7 days of IV therapy, along with a small dose of steroids, she improved clinically and was discharged. And that was her X-ray on the right at the time of discharge, which again showed a lowering of the density of the consolidation. So typically when you have pneumonias, you expect resolution to take about 3 months. So we weren't surprised that it hadn't completely resolved, but it seemed better than what she came in with. 2 weeks post-discharge, she developed increase in cough and breathlessness. Unable to effectively expectorate, she also had a fever spike. Chest X-rays showed these new consolidations with the left upper lobe collapse. We did a sputum fungal culture, which grew aspergillus, which was quite surprising for a well-controlled diabetic with no real risk factors. She was given voriconazole, and if you see the follow-up X-ray on the right, showed a significant improvement. The second patient was an 83-year-old male. He had had a CABG 20 years ago, was a known asthmatic, came in with fever, cough, he had yellowish expectoration and shortness of breath for 5 days. Sats were low, so he was hypoxemic at the time of admission. There were wheezes, polyphonic wheezes, suggesting possibly an asthma flare-up. There was nothing really impressive on the X-ray except a few infiltrates, which may or may not be appreciated on this particular image. The sputum cultures grew MSSA. He was started on ceftriaxone 1 gram twice a day and was given linezolid, even though it was MSSA, because this was an elderly gentleman with, and we didn't want to take a chance. On day 5, while he was admitted, he got better initially, but on day 5, suddenly had a high grade fever, increase in cough with yellowish expectoration. CRP rose from baseline, leukocyte counts were still normal. And this repeat X ray suddenly showed a right upper lobe peripheral infiltrate, which was not there before. We did a bronchoscopy because his X ray was clearly worsening, and the aerobic culture again showed MSSA, which was similar to the earlier sputum sample. But this time the fungal culture grew aspergillus again, and the PCR was strongly positive. Because he was a known asthmatic, we worked him up for ABPA, which was negative. So his immunoglobulin IgE, aspergillus specific IgE and IgG were both negative. Was treated with 14 days of oral voriconazole and promptly improved with treatment. The question is, why did immunocompetent hosts develop fungal pneumonias? And you can hypothesize a lot of reasons, saying that, oh yeah, these are elderly persons, their immunity is low. But could it be because of construction and demolition? The answer is we don't know. We know that post-viral influenzas, for example, aspergillus is being more and more described as a known entity happening in the context of a post-viral infection when the immunity is lowered. Could it be that the temperature and humidity swings? We had a prolonged monsoon this year, then there have been heat waves, then there's been humidity which has been swinging. And could it be because the hosts are changing? So human beings are clearly living longer, longevity is improving, our average life expectancy is improving. And will we see more opportunistic infections as we grow older simply because the host is evolving? Is a question worth asking. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a strong recommendation to anybody who hasn't seen it. It's a series called The Last of Us. The hypothesis being that this invasive fungus starts growing and spreading across the world, and it's like a pandemic situation. And the only reason that it's spreading and growing is because the temperatures change, right? So fungi don't survive so well in current temperatures. But the moment the global temperature changes, there is a possibility that there will be an explosion of fungi who are now well adapted to growing inside the human body at the temperatures we live in. So climate is the evolving environment of the epidemiological triad, right? So we always speak of agent, we speak of host, and we speak of environment. And the environmental part of things are clearly changing. So Aristotle said that life and death are bound up with taking in and letting out of breath, right? So there was this understanding centuries and centuries ago that there is something to do with breathing in air and breathing out of air. If you think about it, food and air are the two constants that we constantly put in our body and are processed by our body. And as even before the germ theory, before anything was understood, there was an understanding that life and death are bound up with the taking in and letting out of breath. So these were the humors, right? That even ancient Indian medicine talks about. You know, the vata, pitta, and kapha. There is an equivalent there which talks about blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. These were the four humors. And there was a belief that changes in the air, heat and cold, damp and dryness disrupt the humors. So even then, there was an understanding that weather plays an important role, humidity possibly plays an important role, rains play an important role. And this is what Hippocrates said. He said, whoever wishes to investigate medicine properly should proceed thus. In the first place, to consider the seasons of the year and what effects each of them produces and the airs of cities. What is our present day understanding? We know that temperature and humidity are key players in respiratory infections. So we know, for example, in North America, in the winters, there's a spike in influenza. We know that in India, in a lot of places, there's a spike in influenza during the monsoons. So clearly, humidity, temperatures play a role. Extreme weather is disrupting this seasonality. So what used to be very predictable in terms of seasons, things are changing. Just look at Mumbai, for example, the prolonged monsoon that we had last year, which is completely out of sync in terms of what we expect, what we plan for. There's abrupt rainfall, heat waves, air pollution, and wildfire smokes. And let's not underestimate the impact of wildfire smokes as well. We realize that as places are heating up, there are wildfires that are occurring on a regular basis. The smoke that is inhaled from these wildfires not only causes an irritant reaction in the lungs, but also disrupts the humidity of the lungs. So it's an established fact that respiratory infections very often increase after exposure to such wildfire smoke. We know that urbanization, overcrowding, and extreme weather drives people indoors. If it gets too hot, you will move indoors into an air conditioned sitting. The more people move indoors, the more there is crowding indoors, the more the likelihood of transmission. Spillover events are other interesting events that we must talk about. So, what is spillover? Spillover is when a virus or an organism spills over from one species to another, right? Which is one of the hypotheses of how SARS-CoV-2 spread to humans as well. And these spillover events depend upon random mutations. So when you have a lot of mixing of organisms, spontaneous mutations develop. And at some point, there is a spontaneous mutation that occurs just by chance, which enables the organism to then spill over to another species. The more the mixing, the more the likelihood of these spontaneous events occurring, the more the likelihood that these organisms then spill over. So this is an interesting paper again, which looks at the shift in global bat diversity and how it could have played a possible role in the COVID pandemic. I'm not going to go into each of these graphs, but basically what they did was they looked at two time periods. They looked at 1901 to 1930, that is one time period, and 1990 to 2019, that was till about 5 years ago. That was the second time period. And they looked at specific area, which was the southern Yunnan province in China. They looked at, so if you see the graphs are temperature, precipitation, and cloud cover, and how these have changed over the years, over the course of a century. Now, this change has then facilitated that particular ecosystem to be very bat friendly. So if you look at the forest types on the left lower graph, the tropical forest types are perfect for a bat habitat. And the southern Yunnan province therefore became a hub where the bat diversity increased exponentially. They then did a worldwide mapping. If you look at the graph on the right, it says climate change driven increase in local bat species richness since the early 20th century. So if you compare, the dark red areas are where the diversity of bats increased significantly, and this was attributable to climate change. And if you look at the center out there, the center out there is the Yunnan province that they studied. And they said that maybe because the bat diversity increased to such a significant extent, aided by climate change, that the spillover event occurred. Similar thing with migratory birds. So one of the fears that we've always had is that of avian influenza crossing over to humans, right? Bird flu is something to really, really, really worry about because the fatality tends to be as high as 50%. So it's nowhere close to the other viruses that we talk about. Fortunately, human to human transmission of bird flu has not happened yet. But if the spillover occurs, that's the next potential disaster waiting to happen. Now, they looked at the landscape change in terms of the risk of avian influenza diversification in the East Asian Australasian flyway. And this is what the East Asian Australasian flyway looks like. So on the map, there's this whole uh, zone, which is a migratory route stretching from the Arctic Circle through Russia, Alaska, down to Southeast Asia to Australia and New Zealand, covers more than 22 countries along the way. It's a critical, high pressure, densely populated corridor supporting over 50 million migratory water birds. Now, why is this important? When you have a bird corridor where 50 million birds move, how the birds interact with each other play an important role in whether spillover events occur. So, if the habitat changes and therefore the birds change their route, they are more likely to interact with other birds which they haven't interacted with before. And that crossover of viruses tends to be facilitated by such events. There was a simulation done which said that between 2000 and 2015, the landscape change reshaped the waterfowl distribution, facilitated bird aggregation at improved habitats, increased co-infection, and raised the reassortment rate. So reassortment rate is the spontaneous mutations that we were talking about by 1593%, indicating a substantially higher potential for viral diversification and emergence. And this might lead to highly pathogenic avian influenza virus spilling over in the future. So closer home, we talk about pigeons. It made it even to the Singapore Straits Times that rats from the sky, urban India finds itself divided on pigeons. This was a study which we did at Hinduja. We looked at all our high resolution CT scans done over a period of a year. In the period of a year, 3,000 scans were done. About 437 were reported as ILDs. Now, 66% of them were females, and HP or hypersensitivity pneumonitis, the ILD that is attributable to pigeon exposure, was found in 47.6%. So, about half of all ILDs at our institution over a time span of 1 year were attributable to hypersensitivity pneumonitis. And this is kind of reported across the country as well. Now, we had a questionnaire asking people about their exposure, and we found that about 77% of those with HP reported a close exposure to pigeons, right? So, again, we think only in terms of infectious diseases, but just pigeon antigens being inhaled by humans can lead to a hypersensitivity reaction, which cannot be ignored. So why is this happening in Mumbai? Because I think there's an extinction of natural habitats. The tree cover, the green cover is decreasing, which is why pigeons move into buildings, pigeons move into shoots of buildings. Feeding behaviors, of course, we feed pigeons, which makes it easy access to food, easy access to breeding. And there seems to be a gradual lack of predators when it comes to pigeons. The crows are vanishing, the vultures don't seem to be as much as they used to be before. Other kinds of the bird diversity seems to be changing. I'm not going to talk about air pollution much because it's a topic that's beaten to death, and most of us have accepted the fact that probably not much is going to change in the near future, unfortunately. But this is a connection between air pollution and TB. This was a study which was presented at the Union World Conference in 2024. They did a meta-analysis of all the available studies linking TB with air quality. And they found that for every 10 microgram per meter cube increase in ambient PM 2.5 or soot, there is a 9% increase in the risk of TB, right? So again, something that we don't intuitively think of. So on one hand, we really want to eliminate TB from our country, and we're trying to do things to go towards that goal. On the other hand, we will have to deal with the reality that if pollution worsens, then this is a new variable in our analysis. So lab models have shown that PM 2.5 exposure impairs the lungs' immune response by reducing protective cytokines, concluding that air pollution is a critical modifiable risk factor for tuberculosis. What about the changing host? So these are questions for all of us that are going to become more and more relevant. Can I continue chemotherapy given that I had a fever, I have a small infiltrate? Can I continue chemotherapy in this context? Can I de-escalate empiric antimicrobials? At what point do I feel safe enough that I can start changing my antimicrobials despite knowing that the host is immunosuppressed? Is this infection, inflammation, relapse, or drug toxicity? A question as a pulmonologist we commonly get asked because of the pulmonology, the toxicities or the lung toxicities associated with a lot of chemo drugs. We know we have a population that's aging. We know comorbidities or non-communicable diseases are increasing. We get asked questions like, how do I protect myself? So is the exercise benefit when I run outside? Does it nullify the harm that is caused by the air quality being so poor? Do we wear masks on a regular basis? So I have a couple of matches that have happened, cricket matches, I think, that have happened in the past couple of days where have used masks and played cricket. Is that safe? Are your carbon dioxide levels going up when you rebreathe your air? Should we go outdoors? Should we stay indoors? So there is an evolving and changing host, thanks to all the different modalities of treatment, thanks to lifestyle changes, thanks to increasing lifespan, that we are going to have to deal with. We all know that there are diagnostic challenges with immunosuppression as well. So people may not manifest with the fever that is, we all like to think of as being associated with infections. Clinical features can sometimes be delayed because the immune response is what drives a lot of the clinical features. In the context of a viral infection, we know that if you are immunosuppressed, there is prolonged shedding associated with it. And there's delayed radiology very often. To get an infiltrate on a chest radiograph, you need to have an intact immune system that creates that infiltrate. So I think I have depressed all of us enough with how bad the situation is, and all the threats that we have to face. I think it's time to talk about the opportunities that we have as well. So let's not just focus on what is the bad. Let's see how we can change things. And I think Dr. Mamta's talk earlier was very interesting in terms of developing systems. At the end, the systems are what is going to define how well we tackle these problems. So let's start with surveillance. So there was a recent story. This was January last year, just about a year ago. The headlines went ballistic, said HMPV cases or human metapneumovirus cases go up in China. Check Maharashtra's government advisory here, says one headline. HMPV virus case live updates. Gujarat sees 2 HMPV cases a day, city cases rise to 5. So the cases were being counted. There was suddenly this panic about HMPV. And we said, wait a minute, this is something that we saw a spike in about 3 or 4 months ago when we were doing biofires in Mumbai, right? And at our institute. So we said, let's dig up our data. And we looked at our data. And if you see our data, the blue, is this working? Okay, the blue graph out there is HMPV, which spiked around August, September. There was a big spike of human metapneumovirus cases in August and September the previous year, suggesting that maybe China got it from us rather than us waiting for China to give it to us, right? And this was not reported. Nobody was counting these cases. Nobody was looking at these cases. Whenever we physicians spoke to each other, we said, yeah, every biofire that we are doing these days is coming up with HMPV. There's nothing to be done. But unless somebody counts these cases, how are we really going to know there is a problem? Number one. Number two, when China reports it, there's sudden panic in India, whereas we've already gone through our possible surge. And who is going to reassure people that that's the case unless you have that data? So we wrote this editorial, Dr. Rodrigues and I, talking about how panic can be prevented by communicating data and quantifying risk better. And I think this is as true today as it was 1 year ago. There is no reason why the story can't repeat itself again, because we don't really have a communication system telling us what's going on in the city. So, for example, when I spoke about the earlier aspergillus cases, what if every hospital in Mumbai is seeing a slight surge in aspergillus cases? Like, who's going to tell us that? Like, who's going to report that? Where do we draw the link between construction and aspergillus if there is one? We need to start thinking of surveillance in terms of a One Health concept. So, what is One Health approach? That humans, environment, and animal health data are all linked together. These cannot work in silos. There is something called an outbreak weather forecast, where epidemiologists and meteorologists need to work together. They need to work hand in hand. We can't say that we work in health, you work in climate, and we won't talk to each other. And let me give you a couple of examples. So there's something called wastewater sampling, right? Which I'm sure everybody in this audience knows about. So wastewater sampling is you sample sewage, and sewage gives you an idea of what is being shed. And wastewater sampling has the ability to pick up an epidemic reasonably before the symptoms and the later surveillance manifests. So in COVID, it was found that it spikes about 7 to 14 days before clinical cases surge. So it's a very useful metric in terms of thinking about mask mandates, thinking about hospital surge planning, thinking about schools. So if you see a huge surge, you can anticipate that there is going to be a problem. Maybe you switch to online school for a week or so till the surge abates, and then you go back to offline school again. Avian flu also is amenable, or is a disease that can be looked at from wastewater sampling. So 30,000 birds, this is just from last month, 30,000 birds to be culled as they found a surge of avian flu in Kerala. And avian flu H5N1 RNA is detected in wastewater in regions with poultry outbreaks. So just sampling the wastewater regularly can give you a heads up as to what to expect. We need to think of surveillance as stacks. So wastewater is an early signal. There is syndromic surveillance, which theoretically is supposed to be in place, that if you have an influenza like illness and there is a spike of influenza like illness, there is a notification to the surveillance that there is a possible surge. Sentinel sequencing is basically targeting high volume hospitals, for example, or high volume centers, in which once you start seeing a surge, you start sampling to do genomic analysis to try and figure out whether there are new variants being detected. Hospital admissions and mortality data should be way down in terms of surveillance, right? If you're just counting hospital data, and if you're just counting the deaths, then you've missed the boat, right? You've missed the opportunity to make a difference. What are the surrogate? There are surrogate ways to do surveillance as well, with a caveat that you need to be listening. There is no conclusive data linking higher AQI to lung diseases, says the government, right? This was in December 2025. A week before that, there is a headline which says toxic air spike sends asthma and COPD drug sales soaring to a 3-year high. No connection with data, but somehow the asthma and COPD drugs soar to a 3-year high. As North India gasps an air pollution crisis, respiratory drug Foracort is the country's top seller, right? So listen to what is happening just in terms of these surrogate markers. You can look at cough syrup sales, for example. That's a very useful metric as to what's happening. You can look at inhaler sales now, since inhalers have become more and more normalized, especially post COVID. And there are lots of surrogate ways of also doing surveillance without actually looking at what exactly is happening. Absenteeism in schools can be a valuable way to do surveillance, which again, I don't think there's any data that we have where we can check what is the school absenteeism or work absenteeism. Internet searches, very useful. There are papers written about how you can use Google searches to try and figure out what's happening in a community. If there's a sudden spike in, for example, diarrhea, then you should look at a food outbreak. If there's a sudden spike in searches for cough, then there's a possible viral outbreak. Hospital records, again, further down the road. And influencers these days seem to know everything. So maybe listen to the influencers. If the influencers tell you, that a lot of people I know are coughing and a lot of influencers are doing that, maybe there's a signal to be found there as well. So rather than diss these surrogate methods, I think there's a lot of valuable data that can be used from surrogate methods. Let's talk about using artificial intelligence. So climate aware outbreak prediction is a very interesting way, which basically you integrate different variables to try and figure out what the infection data is likely to look at. So a conclusion would be something like 3 days after a heat wave plus indoor crowding, you will expect an RSV spike, for example. It can also tell you regionalized predictions. So it can fine tune it to a city. So what's expected in Mumbai, being a coastal city with high humidity, given a certain set of circumstances, may not be the same as what you expect from Delhi, which is a drier city, which is in the north, etc. So you can contextualize this and predict. You can say, for example, high probability of respiratory admissions surge in 7 to 10 days following heat plus AQI plus rainfall patterns. So this particular trend can be crunched in terms of AI to tell you what to expect next. I'm going to give you 2 examples where this has been done and done successfully. So this is Rift Valley fever, which is this is looking at this is a paper from Kenya, which was published in 2009. So they used NASA satellite guided imagery. So if you see the green, the darker the green, the more the vegetation basically. And based on the vegetation, based on the humidity, and based on the El Nino phenomenon, whatever that is, I don't understand it. But these variables basically told them that there is going to be a surge, and they predicted the surge 4 months before it happened, right? So that allows you to prepare in terms of medications, in terms of fumigation, if you want, for mosquitoes, in terms of all the measures that can be put in place to do your best to prevent it. Similarly, dengue, this is from Delhi. They used a retrospective analysis of all the data available and created a model using temperature, rainfall, and relative humidity. and again found that they could have a 2 month lead time, 2 months before an ideal set of circumstances which were conducive to dengue appeared. They could prepare with modeling. Indoor air monitoring is getting easier now with technology getting cheaper. For example, if you do a carbon dioxide monitoring, it gives you an idea of how crowded a particular room is. The higher the carbon dioxide, the lower or the poorer the ventilation, the more crowded the room, the higher chance of transmission. AQI monitors, again, a lot of debate around AQI monitors, which is accurate, which is inaccurate. But once we democratize AQI monitors, I think crowdsourcing that data to tell us what the real number is would be very valuable. Thermal sensors, which we've been using for a long time, but again, a lot gets lost in the volume. So if somebody with a fever walks through a thermal sensor, that's a red flag. That's something that can be picked up. AI driven deployment of HEPA filters. So again, you can use all these variables, right? The carbon dioxide level in a particular place is high, the temperature is low. This is an ideal ground for transmission. Therefore, deploy your HEPA filter in these areas. So even when you're planning a building, when you're planning a hospital, when you're planning a medical clinic, you can deploy these filters based on the AI driven approaches that you have. At a clinician or an individual level, telemonitoring, digital stethoscopes, and AI driven cough analysis. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. So, this is a stethoscope that I was part of the team that developed it with IIT Mumbai. We created a small little device which you can plug out your stethoscope, attach this device, plug in your stethoscope again. You can record sounds, you can transmit it via Bluetooth, you can send it across to another colleague somewhere else in the world if you want a second opinion on what these sounds are. Um, the next level of this ability now is to take these sounds and have it AI analyzed. This was a project I worked on with the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, where we looked at cough sounds, breathing and cough sounds from patients, which can be recorded, analyzed, and looked for a signature. Um, and this was not super sensitive, but it wasn't bad. It met a sensitivity of about 60%, which met the ICMR threshold at that point of time. But this is going to get more and more refined as technology gets better. It's being used for tuberculosis. We also have AI algorithms being used for tuberculosis that incorporate radiology, like mobile radiology, with cough signals, with history all together to kind of give you a probability of TB. This is my own data. On 26th of Jan, I was feeling unwell. I possibly had a viral, and my phone picked it up that this is my sleep data. When I was sleeping, my phone picked it up that my respiratory rate on that particular night was higher than it had been. This is the first time it did it in about 4 months or so, and it was spot on. I was unwell that day, and I think this data is also something that can be churned. Of course, there are going to be concerns around confidentiality, right? The company that's collecting this data needs to be credible. Whom are they reporting it to? Will you be stigmatized in some way? All these are concerns that will have to be addressed. But there is a ton of data out there. So, what is the clinicians and administrators wish list, right? We would love to have instructions such as increase OPD ventilation and N95 use for the next 10 days. Great signal, right? If we see there is a sudden surge in any infection, prepare 20 to 30% rise in respiratory admissions next week, right? Which allows us to free up some bed, maybe delay elective procedures, deploy mobile HEPA units to these 5 locations immediately. Trigger enhanced influenza surveillance in poultry adjacent districts. So there is a poultry outbreak of influenza, enhanced surveillance in the areas around it. So these are problems and these are solutions that AI can get. So delayed. So currently we know that outbreaks are detected very late. So integration of multiple surveillance signals might be the solution with that using AI. We know that the climate has become variable. There's a lot of uncertainty. So what to expect? Oh, it's monsoon, so we're going to expect influenza. It's not monsoon, so we're not going to expect it. All that is going to change with variability in the climate, and therefore risk models need to incorporate this information. Poor visibility of indoor transmission risk. You need to have continuous monitoring. So you cannot necessarily see transmission indoors, but you can use surrogates. There's a high volume of genomic data that's available, which needs to be analyzed to look for spillover events, to look for variants that are detected. And we know that our health systems are very reactive. We wait till hospitalization and mortality data reaches us. We need to start working a lot earlier than that with anticipatory planning and resource allocation. So, summarizing, the air has always been recognized to be a key player in health. centuries and centuries ago. Infections have always been a key focus, and COVID has brought this to the forefront. COVID has made us realize that infections are important, but we must also realize that infections are not the only thing that's important when we are talking about the air. Transmission is often airborne. We need to challenge our conventional models. This whole, you just need to be 2 feet apart, you just need to be wearing a mask, you just need to cover your nose, sterilize your surfaces, and you'll be fine. We need to challenge that conventional thinking. We know that the lungs are vulnerable to the environment as much as infections. There is an earth to lung transmission that we're getting more and more sensitized to. The environment is changing. Temperature, humidity, pollution, all of these things that we assumed were constants and cyclical and periodic are showing us patterns that will be very different in the future. Seasonality and spillovers are likely to evolve. We know that hosts are definitely evolving with longer lives and more immunocompromised in various different forms. However, we live in an age with almost limitless data and computing power. Surveillance needs to be at our center of the interactions with air. Weather, wastewater data, clinical data, surrogate data need to be integrated into predictive AI models. And with monitoring technology getting cheaper, we need to leverage this to help change the trajectories of illness and disease in the future. So I end my talk with a quote from a management guru who said that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pinto. That was a really insightful talk into the airborne diseases and the challenges that I think we face in the future. I would like to invite Dr. Karl to felicitate Dr. Lance Pinto. There's a question. Okay.
So, very captivating talk, Dr. Pinto. It was a very welcome change from technology heavy talk about laboratory medicine since yesterday. I just had one sort of curiosity. If COVID like illness or some different virus, but COVID like illness were to happen today, how different will be our response from what we did during the COVID? That was one question. And some comment regarding the Nipah that is making news. Nipah virus.
So to answer your first question, unfortunately, I think our response may not be very different, unfortunately, right? I mean, we have learned some things, but I don't know if our systems have evolved to an extent where we've reached a point where we'll do something drastically different, right? So a lot of what we've done in the past has not been driven by science; it's been driven by the need to do something, right? So you have to quarantine, for example. You have to shut down schools. I think we had the longest school closures anywhere in the world, and there was not much science to that. We knew very early on that children seemed to be protected. I think what can change only is, if there is a rapid dissemination and communication of data as soon as an event occurs. And I'm not sure whether much has changed in terms of COVID, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Take the air pollution, for example, right now. There is a lot of noise, but does that noise really convert into a lot of action? I'm not really sure. I mean, so that's the unfortunate part. In terms of the Nipah virus, again, it's a reflection of, again, our close intimacy with bats, which again creates the problem. I think the surveillance systems in Kerala probably are reasonably good. They did a great job the last time around as well. But, at the end of the day, again, if you look at it backwards, the surveillance has to begin from the animals before it reaches the humans, right? So, veterinarians, for example, or people who work with the environment need to be in closer touch with doctors, because we are the end result of the problem, right? So once people start dying, once people start getting hospitalized, I mean, you're then doing, it's your firefighting essentially. So I think the communication needs to be better to prevent rather than to react.
Thank you, sir. One just related query. Why Nipah virus testing is not being allowed to the, like, maybe general laboratories? Is it related to policy of not numbers getting spiked and not getting people not getting panicked, or is there science behind it?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I'm unfortunately not an expert on Nipah virus in particular.
okay, fine.
So I can't answer your question specifically.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to invite Dr. Carl to felicitate Dr. Pinto. So as we move on, we go back to the laboratory talks. In the world of diagnostics, a hematopathologist is much like a detective, piecing together subtle clues from peripheral blood and bone marrow, identifying patterns, and uncovering the story behind complex diseases. So we have our own Sherlock Holmes today, Dr. Kunal Sehgal, solving hematology mysteries. Dr. Kunal Sehgal is a consultant hematopathologist and flow cytometrist, director, Newburgh Sehgal Path Lab. He's a MD pathology from PGI Chandigarh with a hematopathology training and fellowship from Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. He has a fellowship from John Hopkins Hospital and Seattle Care Center, USA. He has more than 15 years of experience in hematopathology and is a life member and vice president of the Cytometry Society of India. He's also a member of the Mumbai Hematology Group and the Indian Society of Hematology and Transfusion Medicine. His special interests lie in hemato-oncology diagnostics with focus on CBC, bone marrow, flow cytometry, myeloma diagnostics, coagulation, and molecular genetics. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Vidisha, for the kind introduction. At the outset, I'd like to thank Monisha, Stan, and the whole Sysmex Asia Pacific team for having me here today. It's wonderful meeting because, you know, in addition to the lovely talks and the learning, it's fantastic to meet all the laboratory colleagues at a common platform. It's a rarity to have all lab colleagues from the country come and connect together. So the next 25-30 minutes, my job is to take you through certain clinical cases which we say day to day in our practice. Talk is inspired by this very small, beautiful article by Dr. Barbara Ben. Everyone knows her. Uh, where she titled this talk Hematopathologist as a Detective, and where she quotes about how Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was inspired by his mentors and Dr. Joseph Bell, Dr. Henry, and others, who some were in clinical practice, some were in forensic medical jurisprudence, and how he coined all his, work around all his famous Sherlock Holmes novels around them. For me, a mentor who influenced me a lot in my early days as well as practice was Anita Borges ma'am. And she really was a fantastic detective, and someone who had always that sixth sense to catch and think there's something going wrong and we need to find out more. So that's where my inspiration for this talk title came from. And what I'll do is in the next set of 25 minutes, maybe I have around 8, 9 cases. Some will be just CBCs, and some will take you through a journey of a case, starting from a CBC to maybe flow cytometry and NGS. So let's start with the cases. So if this is a simple printout, and in our country, often the moment a sample is run, and the clinician wants a report even before a sample is run, especially in a private setup, and printouts are given or the values are just declared on the phone and given even before the pathologist has seen the report. So if you see this report, the printout from the machine, and this is what the your lab technologist will first have access to and is on a call already. You are giving a hemoglobin of sorry. So there the hemoglobin is 10.6, WBC count looks okay at 10,420, and the platelets are high with a lymphocyte of 57%. But what is most important is this beautiful quote in The Study in Scarlet, one of my favorite novels there. It's a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases your judgment. So, what is the information that was not available is when I look at the graphs, the histograms, the scattergrams. So, anybody there can tell me is anything wrong over here? This is the scattergram I'm pointing out to, and this is something which is normal. Okay. So you see this whole area on the left is something unusual. You don't see it in samples. With experience, you know this is, the moment I saw this graph, I said, this is a degenerate sample. Okay. This is the smear from the sample. Nothing is left alive. Everything is dead. So when we called up the hospital, they said we had two samples. One was 3 days old and one was a fresh sample. We sent you the wrong sample. We are sorry. Okay. The challenge is that sorry is okay, but in a lab, if you just look at numbers, you would not see what is happening. This is a fresh sample. This was beautifully normal. And when you look at the CBC, it was hemoglobin 10.3. And instead of the 6,29,000 platelets, the platelets were only 51%, 51,000, sorry. So the lymphocytes were only 30%. So the idea is, just looking at numbers and, sometimes in a hurry to look at numbers, we forget to look at the graphs, which give a lot of importance or value to us. So I have a couple of cases where I would like my lab colleagues to look at the graph and see if they can get me something. This is something which has been very popular over the years about the lymphocytes. So anybody what this is could be. So these are just quick rapid fire. This is the lymphocytes on the Sysmex machine, and these are the HFLCs, which we know are very typical, very popular in dengue season because these are all activated lymphocytes, and that one look at the graph tells you that this is likely activated lymphocytes in many viral infections. So again, the idea is you are looking like a detective sharply into that extra information that you have, and then looking at the data. Anyone can tell me what this graph would suggest. So again, normal, this is where the lymphocytes would lie. Some monocytes here, neutrophils here, and this is high scatter, something abnormal. Anyone? Leukemia for sure, but this is the moment I see this graph, it's a little shift and high scatter forming a teardrop appearance, and people who do flow will say, okay, this is highly likely to be an APML. So as difficult a diagnosis and as important a diagnosis, the clues are coming from the CBC scattergrams themselves. Okay. So again, the message, please look at your scattergrams. They give you almost more clues than the numbers before you go. So another case, just going on to the hemato-oncology side. Again, I don't want you to look at the numbers. I want you to look at the graph. And when you look at the graph, this graph comes uncolored where the machine feels I am not sure of the populations. Though you're seeing nice three populations, 1, 2, and 3. Here also you have 1, 2, and 3. The separations are pretty decent, but the machine is not colored. So someone tell me what is happening over here? Anything, this is normal. So lymphocytes, monocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, this is the side scatter. This is the side scatter. And look at this population. Anything about this population looks unusual. So if you see on this graph, when the monocytes ends on this x-axis, that's where the neutrophil starts. So the scatter of neutrophils is more than monocytes. Here, if you see the neutrophils are below the monocytes. So this is a loss of scatter. This is a fresh sample. This is actually a known case of myelodysplastic syndrome with hypogranular neutrophils on the slide on follow-up and multiple mutations which are telling me MDS. If I simply look at the numbers, yes, there is thrombocytopenia, a normal looking hemoglobin, a normal WBC. Okay, I am not really getting that information which I want. But if I start comparing normals and start looking at these patterns, okay, and the other thing we were discussing, I think with another other colleagues yesterday, we tend to take printouts. Those printouts only give us black and white plots. You are missing all the information if you're not looking at your colored plots in graphs like that. So this is another patient. So if I club the two, and we'll go a little one step ahead of the graphs over here. A hemoglobin of 12.3, a WBC count of 1,11,000. This is a 22-year-old male. When I look at this graph, the first thing that it comes to mind, there is a myeloid prominence because this is the area of neutrophils and high scatter is where immature granulocytes counts. This looks like 70-80% of the cells are lying in this window. The count is high, and if you see there's blast, myelo, promyelo. There are also basophils over here. So, the picture is striking to any pathologist, hematopathologist. And the moment you look at the smear, you're thinking of a chronic myeloid leukemia. Okay. So the graph is telling me this is likely CML. And I didn't bring a CML over here. This was positive for fish 922. The idea to bring this case is, this quote, the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. We stop at one information or the second information. But if you went back to the CBC and if I didn't tell you about a WBC count, you would have been focusing on the hemoglobin being 12.3 and then the MCV indices which look typical thal trait like. Okay, and you can have the rules in the Sysmex machines, which will tell you, like in our lab, you have put the BTT cycle index positive. So the staff knows that this comment needs to go and this needs to be, worked out for thal trait. So when we did the HPLC, we did not get, the beta thal trait which we were expecting. So we got a sickle window, which is 19.4%. And interestingly, normally when you get a sickle cell trait, it's between 30 to 40%. The moment you get it below 30%, there's an additional potential alpha thal mutation happening there. And that's where the indices were coming from. So we did an alpha thal deletion testing, and the patient had a A3.17, 3.7 deletion also. So 22-year-old, unusual for CML for that age, but it's not so uncommon, but also had a sickle cell and alpha thal trait. So again, the CBC was giving us a lot of pointers in different directions. So make full use of the data that you have, to really diagnose that patient. Moving ahead, this is a 59-year-old gentleman who had bicytopenia. Hemoglobin was low, 5.9, quite a severe anemia, and WBC was 3000 with a relative lymphocyte percentage at 55. So, in August 23, there was a hypercellular bone marrow suppressed erythropoiesis. It's only 3%. And when we did the bone marrow biopsy, it was suggestive of PRCA, pure red cell aplasia, and many reactive lymphoid aggregates, karyotyping, typical thought at this age, bicytopenia, myelodysplastic syndrome, the whole workup is done. Typically, in myelodysplastic syndrome, you have erythroid hyperplasia in the marrows. This was erythropenia. Okay. And we went back to the CBC, that the CBC is leukopenia, but there's relative lymphocytosis. And that is the essence of seeing the CBC smears along with your bone marrow. So interestingly, there were many LGLs these are the large granular lymphocyte. You can see the tailing and the beautiful granules inside the lymphocytes, and there are plenty of them. So I said, we need to do a flow in this condition because it's not looking like MDS. I'll not go into the depths of the flow, but we did a comprehensive B and T cell tube. The interesting part is if I look at the lymphocytes, majority were T. These are the 3 positive, 7 positive cells. Majority were bright 8 positive. So this is an altered ratio, which can happen in viral reactive conditions also. And that's where LGLs can also come. But the importance is majority of these were gamma delta T cells. And gamma delta T cells are negative to dim heterogeneous 8. They are never bright 8. So already telling me there is subtle abnormalities there. And when we did other values, the loss of 7, the homogeneous 8, the dim homogeneous 5, telling us that these are abnormal gamma delta T cells. And we made a diagnosis of a gamma delta T LGL leukemia in this patient. So the thing is, if you look at PRCA, one of the known causes is the TLGL leukemia. Okay. But when it comes to PRCA, we generally start thinking parvovirus. Okay. We start looking at immunosuppression. Start looking at other infections. This does not strike to our mind because there was no leukocytosis and a LGL like picture over there, though the smear was showing, and it can be very difficult. But you put two and two together and you can get a diagnosis. And this was a sort of a rare scenario where we diagnosed this condition as the cause of the PRCA. Move to the next patient. 76-year-old female patient, and she presented with generalized weakness in June 25. She had a known past history of anemia, which used to come, and she appeared normal. Otherwise, clinically, there were no physical symptoms. But the clinician was working up for nutritional anemia, and all the workup was not contributory. And when the CBC came to us at this time point, if you see, it's actually pancytopenia, hemoglobin of 4, a WBC count which is low at 2,240, and a platelet count is 31,000. So, this typically we get this CBC for review, and we wrote back to the clinician, please provide us clinical details and discuss the case. A bone marrow examination may be done because of pancytopenia. So that was our comment, which we added and said, okay, marrow is advised. So marrow was done, and as expected, think of pancytopenia, elderly patient, recurrent blood transfusion requirements. You are thinking of MDS. Marrow showed erythroid prominence and nothing significant, and there was a normal diploid karyotype, so there's nothing being found there. Interestingly, it was hypercellular. Okay, if you see, there were a lot of MEGs. There are some erythroid colonies. You see adequate MEGs all around. Full trilineage hematopoiesis over there, and we have sent the workup for NGS. So now NGS report comes pathogenic mutation variant in the PIGA gene. If you all know, the PIGA gene is the mutant which we detect in PNH. Okay. Now we go back. This patient had pancytopenia. The CBC had come a week ago. The marrow comes a week later to our lab. We are working for MDS. So we called back for the fresh blood sample, and there was a frank PNH clone. This was the flare which was given by the Sysmex team, and we started using this flare product, which is pretty good, giving a very good, separation as far as routine PNH acids are concerned. And we have a very big clone of 87, 91% in the neutrophils, 87% in the monocytes. So we know that pancytopenia, we think of aplastic anemia and aplastic or low grade MDS are associated PNH clones. We know rarely PNH can come with hypercellular marrows, but typically in those marrows, you start seeing an evolving aplastic, and the hypercellularity is because of the erythroid hyperplasia. This case was a great learning because there were a lot of MECs, there was proper triage hematopoiesis, and we didn't suspect. And I think the lesson learned, in my training days, my teacher, Dr. Jasmine, used to say, do not see CBC and marrows separate. See it on the same day, even if it's come 1 week before, come there. So what happens is we are going with the history, pancytopenia, hypercellular marrow. Had you seen the smear, the CBC, it was very aplastic like. That would have given us a clue this patient requires PNH workup. And we missed at time one, but really a good comprehensive NGS assay, including a PGA gene, which has nothing to do with a myeloid neoplasm, but including that helped us pick this PNH indirectly. So, again, a quote from The Valley of Fear: the temptation to form premature theories upon insufficient data is the bane of our profession. Idea being, often these patients get labeled as MDS, and we are missing out the whole actual cause behind the picture. So, this is a next case I go to is an extremely challenging case, also extremely satisfying in terms of how we led to the diagnosis, and a prime example of what teamwork happens in hematology practice. So this guy has gone to maybe 3 hematopathologists, 2 pediatricians, 3 clinical hematologists, and 2 other physicians for the whole setup. So you will see the story as as I go along. He gets admitted in a hospital to the right-sided lower motor neuron facial palsy. So when he goes to the hospital, he goes to an ENT and they diagnose on MRI the patient has bilateral mastocytitis. Okay, that mastocytitis is what is causing the thing. So now they're concerned. They do a CT and CT of the skull, and they find multiple areas of infiltration and lytic lesions in the skull. And you're dealing with a 1-year-old child which has left to this palsy. Now this is where they now refer to an oncology reference, and the patient then moves out of hospital one, goes to a primary pediatrician, hospital two, has taken discharge against medical advice, and the steroids were discontinued. So basically, multifocal lytic lesions, and now the clinician says, let's get a biopsy done from this lesion. And I got a call from Dr. Jankaria saying that there is these lesions, and he gave me shared his photographs very kindly, and he did an aspirate from one of the lytic lesions. And what we now do is we think of flow cytometry as liquid sample. We also do flow cytometry by teasing tissue or solid tissue, small biopsies, or taking the aspirate which comes along, even it's 100, 200 microliters, and it is amenable for flow. So while Dr. Zankaria was doing the actual site biopsy, he did aspirate some blood and some tidbits of tissue, which we teased and converted to a flow sample. And his differentials were leukemia, neuroblastoma, METs, and histocytosis. And he said it looks hematolymphoid in some way, but the age, please rule out LCH, typical thing, but he was not confident on the whole pattern. So these are the smears we made from that little 250 micrometer aspirate we got from that temporal bone lytic lesion. And they all look like immature myeloid cells, granular cells, like myelocytes and promyelocytes. There was no neutrophils over there. And it did look like unusual. But then you're hitting a bone. Are we seeing a bone marrow? Really? But in a temporal lesion, why are there immature myeloid cells? We are worried for a myeloid neoplasm. We ran a flow. There were no blast per se. As you see on the scatter, these are all immature, mature myeloid cells mixed together on the first plot. The the 33 positive cells over in here in green were the cells of interest. But 11B in orange tells me that they are maturing cells. The green cells are more likely immature. The graph number 4 at this end is interesting because the odd part here was the immature cells are all 15 negative. If you see the mature cells are 15 positive. Now 15 negativity with loss of DR, we think of APML. Okay. But that was troubling me a lot. Am I dealing with an APML? There are hypergranular myeloid cell cells, but 1 year old male, lytic lesions all over the skull, and calling it APML is very risky. It didn't fit the whole gamut of things. But we did a flow and said this is unusual myeloid population. That's what he reported. It went to Bodhis ma'am's lab. Dr. Shilpa reported this patient, and they reported as cells expressing MPO43 and DIM13 with multiple other markers, and they said possibly hematolymphoid, possibly myeloid leukemia, and they called it a myeloid neoplasm and left it there. Again, no 34, no 117, no TDT, no immaturity markers, just myeloid markers positive based on the location called myeloid neoplasm. We did a bone marrow on this patient. So this is where the second clinical hematologist comes in. Aspirate was similar. The liquid samples are dilute, very similar to the temporal bone FNAC slides. We did everything. Again, no blast. Again, those immature myeloid cells, we didn't repeat a flow. But I was worried about APML. So we did the PML RARA, we did RARA break apart probe, and the fish test was negative for PML RARA. So that at that point seemed to be ruled out. But we did send for a comprehensive NGS. Now, this picked up a mutation, which is for the first time we reported in our lab, is the TBL1XR1 RAR-B fusion. Idea is not to bring to a rare thing. The idea is to say how this consolidation of test, it's some an extremely rare form of APML, which does not have the PML RARA, RAR-A. This is the RAR-B gene. And these patients are, what we call the atypical PML RARA negative acute promyelocytic leukemia with a very, very unusual presentation. From the data point of view, the few cases which are there in literature are supposed to be resistant to ATRA, but this patient did not respond initially to the AML therapy, so they shifted the patient back to ATRA, AT or etoposide. In June, the patient was MRD positive still. By September 25, the MRD negative and still doing very well. Okay, so the idea was over here. What I want to share this difficult case was the breadth of view is one of the essentials of our professions. The interplay of ideas and the oblique uses of knowledge are often of extraordinary interest. So, had the interventional radiology team not sent that sample to us for flow, had we not thought of it, had we not sent for the NGS, we would have really not clinched the diagnosis in this case. So that's something which was, very unique, and the patient is doing well at the end of the day. That is what's, the most satisfactory thing. Come to my last case. This is 77-year-old female, history of right carcinoma breast in 2014, operated with radiation, has come with leukopenia, occasional night sweats, no fever, no weight loss, no bone pains, a strong family history of various cancers. So, did the whole works, protein electrophoresis, CBC, marrow, and again, cytopenias, you are thinking of myelodysplastic syndrome. That's the most common test which gets done in cytopenias is the whole works for uh, MDS. Protein electrophoresis was normal. This is the CBC. Again, leukopenia, 3.7 WBC count, and the hemoglobin is 11.9. Platelets is normal. And again, I'm going to come back to this graph. It's only showing the blue color neutrophils and the pink color lymphocytes. Okay, now I'll tell you why I have to come back to this graph over here. An aspirate was done. In the aspirate, we had no major findings. We just said normocellular bone marrow with erythroid predominance. Now, it's come as cytopenias and occasional 1% blast. And so we were told to look at flow cytometry also. And whenever we get suspected cases of MDS, we do an AML MRD like workup because you're looking at maybe blast less than 1% as abnormal part of the myeloid neoplasm. We did a comprehensive AML MRD workup, no evidence of dyspoesis in the myeloid monocytic series, no blast. There was, as I said, in the CBC, there was a leukopenia, again, some reactive LGLs in the background. So we said, okay, let's look at the LGLs, like I showed you in the previous case. And we found there were no T cell clonality by DRBC1 also, and all reactive populations. And we said, no abnormality found, and we stopped there. Then comes the biopsy. The biopsy was nicely hypercellular. At this power, it is difficult. And we felt these are all erythroid colonies. And we did a basic routine screening with CD3 and 20. And to our surprise, there was multiple aggregates of CD20 positive cells, a couple of them paratubercular and some patch areas, whereas some areas were completely normal. There were other areas which had multiple of these aggregates, just bright 20 positive. Now, this stuck me, my first worry was, is this a mix up? I'll be very frank. We went back, in a lab, you're always worried because it's been 5 days, 6 days, the clinician's calling you for diagnosis and you not really have an answer. And then suddenly you change the diagnosis to lymphoma, which the clinician didn't even suspect. So we went back, labeling, barcoding, everything, and it seemed correct. We went back to the aspirate, dilute. We couldn't really see any real abnormal lymphoid cells. And I remember this patient is Dr. Swati Pai's very close family friend. She called me from Bangalore. Are you sure this is lymphoma? I said, ma'am, before you even called, I have already worked up all the mix-ups. This is 100% lymphoma, but something was troubling me that, we did a flow. We did not look at B-cell lymphoma. The flow came for MDS. So we did an AML tube. We did a T-cell tube. I said, whatever we have done, can I just go back? In one of my tubes, there is CD19. Can I go back and evaluate that again? So we evaluated this time from the point of view of B-cell lymphoma. And what I did is we simply gated on the lymphocytes region and the monocyte region over here. And because in our AML MRT tube, we also have CD19, we gated all the 19 positive cells. And suddenly we realized there is some high scatter population which is lying in that lymphocyte area in the monocyte region, which we normally don't look at when we are doing an AML MRT and IC, you're looking at myeloid cells. And this was positive for 19 and they are very dark, and this was 38 dim over here. Now, also simultaneously, we also had 123 in this tube because in AML MRT we had 123, and this population was a moderate 123 positive. So bright 19, 123 positive lying in that monocyte region started troubling me, and I said, okay, am I dealing with a hairy cell leukemia? Patient is pancytopenia, okay, and I'm getting those cells, and retrospectively you start seeing those classical fried egg appearance, but which we didn't pick up upfront. Very interestingly, patient had an NGS done, and this is all happening in that duration. DNMT3 and TET2 at very low VAF, 5% and 9%. Is this MDS or is this chip mutation? Suspected case, very difficult. Interestingly, had a BRAF gene. This confirmed that this patient has to have what we are suspecting. And I called for a peripheral blood of this patient, and we did like a hairy cell leukemia MRD evaluation. So I would want you to focus on the black dots, very few of them, but 103 positive, nicely 200 bright, 11C, 25, 19. And if I go to the next slide, this is the polyclonal B cells on kappa lambda, but the black cells are bright kappa positive. So this is a hairy cell leukemia. Okay. And I said I wanted to go back to the CBC. Again, CBCs came at a separate time, the marrows came at a separate time. If I go back to the CBC, the lesson we always think about when you have monocytopenia, when you have zero monocytes in the peripheral smear, please look for hairy cells. They may be very, very few on morphology. Retrospectively, you could hardly pick up one odd cell, but that is always a clue which was lying there in the CBC, which we didn't pick up. Again, the challenge of not seeing both things together and putting everything in perspective. But a great learning always when you see these cases and learn from your experience. So so detection in daily practice, this is an old maxim of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however probable, must be the truth. So that feeling that this was a mix-up, something mistake, but it turned out to be actually true, and it was a case of hairy cell leukemia. So with that, I end my talk. I thank you and share this thing, my feelings that hematopathology must be practiced with humility, seeking always to discover the truth. And the hematopathologist must be careful never to settle prematurely on a diagnosis, closing his mind to other possibilities. Thank you so much for your patient listening and happy to take questions. It's my team who helps me get these cases out here. Thank you.
Any questions for sir? So thank you, sir. That was a really enlightening talk. I really loved all the cases, and it pays to do a pull, have a good team which connects with you and communicates with you regarding all the cases. I would like to invite Dr. Karl to felicitate Dr. Kunal Sehgal.
Thank you, doctors. Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. Now we'll go for a tea break. We request all in-house participants to complete their checkout and keep your luggage at the concierge near the reception area. Please note that airport drops arrangements have been made post the conclusion of sessions. I request you all to kindly come back soon in another 30 minutes. Also, we have a QR code. Okay, 20 minutes. So we have a QR code which will be displayed on the side panels. These are surveys which has to be filled. So we request you to kindly scan that QR code and fill up the survey. So quickly check out and we'll see you back in the banquet.
One more announcement. If you have not signed today's attendance, it is mandatory for the MMC CME points. Please see that you even sign for today because it is required for the protocol. Thank you.
So we'll begin with the next session. I invite Dr. Mahajan to kindly come up on stage and take the following proceedings. Dr. Mahajan, over to you.
So we'll begin with the second part of the sessions. As we know in hematopathology, precision matters. Every cell tells a story, and what a better way than flow cytometry to tell us about it. So I would like to invite Dr. Anil Handu to speak upon the evaluation of the Sysmex XF 1600 flow cytometer at a tertiary care hospital. Sir is the Principal Director, Hospital Lab Services and Transfusion Medicine, and Principal Director, Academics and Research at Max Healthcare Institute Limited and Associated Hospitals, Dr. B.L. Kapoor Memorial Hospital at New Delhi. Sir is editor-in-chief of Flow Focus, a clinical cytometry e-newsletter. He's also the president of the Cytometry Society of India. He's ex-secretary, Delhi Society of Hematology, life member of Indian Association of Pathologists and Microbiologists, life member of Indian Society of Hematology and Transfusion Medicine, life member of Delhi Society of Hematology and the Cytometry Society. Sir has about 80 plus publications in peer-reviewed journals and book chapters to his credit. I would like to now invite Sir for the talk.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And at the outset, I'd like to thank Sysmex for giving me this opportunity to talk about something which I had an opportunity to work with for the last almost now 4 years. And I'm going to share some work which we did in collaboration with them at our center in BL Kapoor Hospital in Delhi. Now, this is the place where I work. It's a hospital which is in the heart of culinary delight in Delhi called Karol Bagh. So if you guys visit in Delhi, please do visit us because you will definitely go to Karol Bagh at least for shopping and for the culinary delights there. And this is my lovely team back home, who have really contributed a lot into this whole activity as well. I have just one disclosure to make that Sysmex has funded my travel and hospitality for this, and this is what I have done. I have put my talk into following subheadings, few historical aspects, because directly going into the talk and telling you, oh, this machine is great, is something which I think would be a little preposterous. And I'll tell about a little bit about the evolution of flow cytometry. We'll talk a little bit about the instrument and reagents, the new kids on the block, and the study that we undertook at our center in BL Kapoor Hospital on XF 1600. So, like the evolution of mankind, from where we were like apes and from standing upright, that's how the evolution has happened in everything. And obviously, flow cytometry has not been left far behind. In the last 4 decades or so, it's grown leaps and bounds. And I'm sure most of you would have seen that from just 3 color flow cytometry to almost about 25, 30 color flow cytometry today, life has moved on significantly. So if I look at today's era, and I would like to urge and ask all of you, do you know who this man is, in flow cytometry? So if you don't know, the flow cytometrist would say it's blasphemy, right? So this man is Howard Shapiro. And interestingly, his statement is extremely true today. And it says, For modern labs, the instrument, and the instrument is what? A flow cytometer is a natural selection. And this is something which a lot of people don't realize how flow cytometry has changed your lives. But if I give you the kind of parlance to the previous talk which Kunal gave, almost every alternate case was talking about flow cytometry. Well, you might wonder and think that we are kind of biased flow cytometrists, but that's the story of the day. Flow cytometry is here to stay, and flow cytometry is taking the center stage even in the era of genomics. So when did it all start? It started way back in 80s when the HIV pandemic happened. And at that point of time, because we were so interested to know the viral loads and the CD48 counts, that's what pushed the research into the flow cytometry part of it. And of course, as you move towards 25 and 26, the number of publications on flow cytometry have gone, kind of, if I use the term, viral, and lots of publications have come up. But just to give you a background of how the first ever flow cytometer looked like, this is from where we started. Okay. This was the first ever flow cytometer. And imagine somebody sitting in a room and working on this kind of a machine and saying, I'm doing flow cytometry. Obviously, nobody, most of the glamorous people sitting in the audience would be like, oh, I don't want to be there. Yeah, it's all right. Now let's look at the evolution over last few years, what's happened, or decades. This is how it all started. The first flow cytometry platform, which was basically an impedance-based flow cytometry device, and based on Coulter principle, to the ones which were primarily based on the fluorescence part of it, and eventually grew further to introduce proper flow cell matrix in around 80s, from where the actual pandemics and the HIV pandemic started. But what changed the entire thing and it made it a little too glamorous for all of us to start looking forward was having these kind of flow cytometry instruments, which was small, benchtop, available to us to keep it in our laboratories. Actually, feel proud about it. And as they say, Kunal would talk about in his talk, neighbors envy, owners pride for IPF. And I would say the same thing for flow cytometry as well. Those who had, they would think, oh my God, we are out of this world. And the ones who didn't, they would always keep envying the others. Nevertheless, that's how history went ahead, from where it started to where it went. And of course, this picture, which you should never take out of your mind, that's how the humble beginning of a classical flow cytometer was. And to a day today, where we have all these sorts of flow cytometers. I know most of you would be aware of the faxes and the calibers and the arias, and of course, this really small benchtop flow cytometer. I don't know how many of you actually had the opportunity of working on it, but this is something which was really out of this world, and perhaps that was one of the reasons why probably BD just acquired it and kind of kept it to one side. Nevertheless, this is how the evolution has happened over all these years. I'll not get into details of this because it has, not really a significant relevance to what I'm going to talk about. But I would want you to pay attention to my next slide, which talks about how flow cytometers are principally based. So you have three main types of flow cytometers available in the market today. One, which is based on fluidics primarily. The second, which is based on acoustics. And the third one, which is based on the cytomass cytometry, a CyTOF. So these are the three distinct kind of flow cytometers available. Most of us are actually using fluidic based flow cytometers, and few do have acoustic flow cytometers. And mass cytometers today are still in the palm of the realism or of the research part of it as on date. Now I'll change gears a little and we'll move to the year 2020. Now, if I ask you, 2020 became extremely famous for what? COVID. Yes. So as the COVID set in, and as we were all grappling with COVID and the lockdowns and the stuff like that, that is the point in time somehow the new kid on the block took its birth. Or should I say it was not so new? It was an old kid which was raised again, made into a kid, and then raised into an adult and presented to you once again from the Partech, to the Sysmex part of it. And it was launched in June 17, 2020. That's what I'm supposed to believe. But that's how the story was. And this instrument came into being. It was a telecolor instrument which came into being at that point of time. And obviously, to run a flow cytometer, it's nothing to do with only the machine. Machine is one aspect of it. You just needed one more kid on the block, And that kid was the flow cytometry software, which is associated with this, a third party thing, which helps you to analyze your data. So you had two things. One, which is a flow cytometer, that was the Sysmex XF1600. The another kit which was there, this was Venturi One software. Unfortunately, I had experience of working on both. And this is how the data looked like. And it had all the possible methodologies to work on. You could, actually look at the SNE analysis and other things which can potentially be done on any third-party classical software using Venturi software, which can be adopted in this instrument. Now, that was 2020 when they launched it. But in our center, it was somewhere around 22. And this was the time when COVID had kind of gone down markedly and it had in fact been chucked out. And what else happened in 2022? Any guesses? Any guesses? All those who are actually keeping abreast with the world, they should know what happened in 22. Lots of things happened. Russia invaded Ukraine. I don't know whether you realize this or not. The world population touched 8 billion. And of course, the Queen Elizabeth also passed away. And the Iranian women actually stood up for their rights. And what else happened? The Sri Lankan economy went down. So lots and lots of big things happened in 2022. But what actually happened in 2022 was suddenly we all started talking about big responsibility, bigger ambitions, and the G20 thing, which was sold very, very well at that point of time, not only within the country, but globally by our Honorable Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. And at the same time in 2022, Amardeep and his team were instrumental in ensuring and letting us start having a relationship between Max and Sysmex. And in that point of time, they installed this instrument in our center, which was XF1600, and we had the opportunity of starting working on that point. Along with that, we also had another instrument in our system at that point, and this was the sample preparatory system, which we adopted in our center. So we had two distinct systems. Along with that, I also had the opportunity of working on Venturi as a software on the system as well as on my laptop, thanks to Dr. Pradeep, who sits in the audience right in front of me here. And we embarked upon a study to look at XF1600 as an instrument. Does it really work as well as the ones which are already established in the world, right? So it's like you get a new thing on the platform, it's great, but people are already using some things and they're not willing to change. How do you, kind of tell them that it's better perhaps? Well, the simplest way to do that is do a non-inferiority study and tell them that whatever you're using, that's great, but we have something which is equivalent, or maybe in certain cases might give you certain advantages as well. So that's what we embarked upon. And this is what we did. We started looking at 8 Intel color panels, which were being used on XF1600, as well as on Lyric, using SciFlow reagents, which were from Sysmex at that point of time, as well as from the BD reagents that were already existing in our system. We decided to do it on a short cohort of patients at that time, first establish that we're able to get similar or maybe better results, or in other words, non-inferior results. So this was the 8-color antigen screening panel that was used in our center. This is something which we already had, for an ALOT tube. And this is the Sysmex one which we used. You can identify the clones, which are some of them are obviously different. Some others are common clones between the two. And we use them in two distinct sets. One, wherein a population, a sample was actually processed only with the BD reagents and then run on XF1600 as well as on BD Lyric. And the other one where we had both these reagents, the reagents from Sysmex as well as the reagents from BD, and they were run on both the instruments parallelly, whatever could have been done as a combination. And incidentally, the thing was, and it was restricted primarily to acute leukemias. So this was our gating strategy, nothing extraordinary. If you look at flow cytometry on a day in, day out basis, you would know that you want to get the junk removed, use a singlet gate, and of course, take the non-debris cellular events. And obviously, the most important strategy that we generally look at in acute leukemias is your 45 side scatter gating, where you identify your blasts in the region of progenitors, and then on those blasts, subsequently try and see what are the various plots which you are going to be looking at. So now from the CD45 side scatter, you either have these cells which are blasts, or you have the other cells which are lymphoid, monocytes, and the grans. And on them, then you are trying to identify the presence of blasts by using blastic markers. I'm not giving you anything which is extraordinary here. It is the routine which is done in a flow cytometry laboratory, which I'm just showing you how we did it in this particular case as well. So we looked at the presence of expression of 34, looked at the presence of expression of the T and the B cell markers. Of course, the expression of surface and cytoplasmic markers, including MPO and 79A, and this is all on blast, as you can identify from the color of the dot plots here. And of course, on the other side, you were also wanting to look at your lymphoid cells, the green populations, wherein you were identifying the T cells and the B cells and the NK cells, and also trying to identify the rest of the cells using the MPO and the other markers. So this is what we did. This was a simple enough grading strategy, just like most of us use it in our acute leukemia panels. And this is an overview of the gating strategy that you're able to see here, right? And identifying them as two distinct populations. So what did we find? Did we find anything which was not different or similar or what? So this is how it was. I'm going to suggest not to really get bogged down by the written part of it here, but look at the plots over here in front of you. If you notice the orange and the blue, the triangular stuff and the circles, most of them are showing similar expressions. And here we were only considering the instrument performance. The reagents were from one vendor, that was from BD, and all these reagents gave us similar expressions in terms of the expressions which were picked up on the instruments on both the sides. We also looked at the instrument performance with individual markers separately and on individual blast cells separately, and identified most of them, again gave us significantly similar information. Again, this was again on the instrument part of it that the comparisons were being done. Now, when we moved into two stained sets, the ones which I have highlighted in the red, so here we were trying to look at the reagent performance part of it. And in this reagent performance, we were trying to see on the blasts as well as on the other expressions. And then we noticed that most of this information coming from these two sets of reagents was almost, again, reasonably similar. Of course, there was some variability in MPOs and others, but was not significant. But what was striking was the expression of CD34. More obviously, when we looked at it from the stain index standpoint, it was very, very obvious that the 34, which was from Sysmex, was showing us a better expression or a better stain index for us to identify the blast populations. So this is how the whole thing came up in front of us. And I'll just show you comparative plots between the two. So this is the subjects that we had, and just look at the expressions of 34. You can see obviously slightly higher expressions in most of them. In most of our cases that we adopted in our center, just for a visual part of it, as I'm showing you here. In all of them, I'm just showing you how 34 kind of scored or showed a better expression on the scatter plots. And when we look at the stain index and the performance part of it, in terms of the percentage population, obviously, if there is a 34, which is going to identify my cells in a better manner, but naturally, it will also identify stuff in terms of percentage populations in a better manner. Same thing happened on the stain two distinct sets for reagent performance, as well as for the stain index part of it, where 34 kind of stood out and gave us a better information. So I think I have been able to convince, if not kind of pushed you to look at XF as something which was breath shaking. It's nothing but at least a non-inferior to thing, whatever has been happening already in our lives with respect to the BD instruments or the Beckman instruments. Here, the Beckman is not in picture, but I'm reasonably sure even in there, it should give us similar information. So to take home, one very few things which I would like to emphasize on, BD Lyric and Sysmex FX were compared for establishing non-inferiority of XF 1600. There was no significant difference observed between most of the evaluated parameters. Blast cells showed almost equivalent percentage with stain index for leukemia and screening for all the screening antigens. And the study showed that both the instruments are equivalent for their sensitivity and performance for acute leukemias for screening of blasts. In a phase 2 study, when we did this part of it, we found that 34 as an antigen from the antibody which was used by Cyflow reagents was definitely better in terms of its stain index and was able to pick it up in a much better manner in terms of blast percentage as well as for the stain index, which I showed you graphically also. And the study eventually concludes that the instruments, both from Sysmex Corporation as well as from BD Sciences, are able to offer you comparable sensitivity and resolution for acute leukemia diagnosis. And I will not end here, but add a little more. Venturi as a software is an amazing software, which, if you get your hands to lay on, you would start realizing that it's almost similar to what we have from the Beckman Coulter, which is Kaluza. In fact, a few things perhaps even better than Kaluza, where it helps me to merge my data and have a significant data, if, emphasis by putting it in terms of Tisney plots and others in a much better manner. So Venturi One as a software tool, again, is a user-friendly tool. It's simple to use and it's highly adaptable for complex data analysis. So if you have the opportunity, I'm sure Pradeep and his team would have the instrument and the software possibly available. Am I right, Pradeep? Okay, so you can potentially, visit the stall and see how that instrument kind of shows up and, all your data. They have some data available with them. And that will eventually help you to realize that this instrument system, which includes the not the instrument alone, but the instrument system, the reagent preparatory system, as well as the software system together as a combination, gives you a good edge over a lot of stuff which you can potentially work on, at least in the routine diagnostic cases. In our center, we've also worked on, I don't have the data to present to you in front of you now, but we have also worked on flow cytometric HLA crossmatch. We've also worked on PNH, and all of these studies have also shown similar or maybe even better results with some of their reagents. And last but not the least, it's important to realize one very important thing, that all of you sitting here in the audience, while I might talk a lot about how Sysmex is great and how Cyflow reagents are amazing and stuff like that, but it's far more important to realize that it's the man behind the machine, who has to do his job correctly. It doesn't start from you because you come at the end. You only analyze the data. It comes right from the time the sample is collected to the sample preparation, where your technical staff is actually taking care of your samples, and standardization of that, training of those people, making sure that you adapt to your workflow in such a way that you're not actually creating impediments for your technical job and technical profiles, is mandatory before you start talking about this instrument or any other instrument for that matter. I would like to thank at the end all of you for your patient hearing, and importantly, I would like to acknowledge the background work which has been done by Dr. Pradeep, who's there in the audience right now. And more importantly, I think if Amar is here, Amar was the one who was the driving force, kind of pushing me to at least, sir, evaluate to kar lo. So that's where from where we started. And I think that's something which made me believe very strongly that this particular instrument is here to stay. It's no more a new kid on the block. It's an adult on the block. It's already existing on the block. The only thing is the block is in our mindset to start adapting in our routine practice. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Acknowledgements to my team as well for standing by me to evaluate this instrument. And I'll just take 30 seconds more of your time. We have the Cytometry Society of India annual conference coming up this time. It's our first kind of drive to drive it out of the conventional institutional based practices. We are trying to go to the beaches of Goa, and we are all wanting you to come over there. We call it the coastal jewel. And in that place, we not only will, kind of study hard, but I can tell you we can do a beach party harder. So I urge all of you to keep noticing what we are going to be sending across to you on our website, which is pcs.res.in. And the dates are 22nd to 25th of October 2026. So please block your calendar. There is no Karwa Chauth, there is no Diwali, there is nothing happening in these dates, guys. So you will have no bahana to tell me that you could not come for this event. And we are working very, very hard to make it a good event. We have almost about 5 or 6 international faculty coming in. And of course, with the support of all the vendor associates, I'm sure we'll be able to have a good academic and a gala extravaganza as well. The dates, once again, guys, 22nd to 25th of October 2026. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
One question from my side, sir. How many colors is this machine?
So the machine that we worked on is a 10 color instrument, and they already have an upgrade for this, which is a 14 color instrument. Am I right, Pradeep? I don't have the 14 yet, but I have a 10 color instrument in our lab, and it's still with us, and we're still functioning on it. And in fact, it's moving on to a typical commercial mode now. So I can assure you that we are having both Lyric and this in our center, and both are working very well. Yes, sir. Yeah, you're audible.
Uh, we have all been listening to over the years. Uh, I work in a very small setup. We don't do flow cytometry as of now, but maybe National Medical Council requirement for medical college has put now flow cytometry as one of the requirements, I guess. So, how long does it take to sort of learn flow cytometry from basics to reporting? If you can, and do you have any training sort of program for older individuals?
Okay, that gets me to a very interesting thought in my mind. You know, many years ago, when I joined my post graduation, that was way back in 2000. Dr. Vanamala is here, my batchmate. Uh, I initially joined in a different campus, and I had a friend there. And those days, this email thing had just come in. Okay, and I asked him, Vidya, can you help me? I want to have an email. He says, yeah, but you will pay for that cyber cafe 60 rupees. 60 rupees in 2000 was a lot of money. I don't know how many of you realize that, but for me it was. So I said, okay, fine, no problem. I'll pay those 60 bucks, but you will help me, how to do this emailing thing. He says, yes, of course. So we went to the cyber cafe. I paid up, of course, it had to be advance payment. We went inside. That he helped me open an email account. No doubts on that. Of course, I don't use that account anymore. But other than the email part of it, he did everything else. You know how boys are. So those 60 minutes, we finished off. We came out. He says, "तुझे सब समझ आ गया ना?" I said, "बिल्कुल समझ आ गया." He says, "What?" I said, "I understood only one thing in this whole activity, that when I will go to the cyber hub next time or cyber cafe next time, I will not take you along. I'll pay these 60 rupees myself, and I will fiddle around with the stuff on my own." So how good are you at handling software is the key for your interpretation part of it. So if you are a tech savvy person, you probably will take maybe a month to get hold of it. But if you are not, it might take you maybe 6 months or sometimes maybe a year. But mind you, this all I'm talking about diagnostic flow cytometry. Fortunately, in flow cytometry today, we have a lot of closed softwares where you actually do nothing. You just run the sample and you get the results. For example, CD48 counts, etc., because they are kind of locked protocols. They're more like your Kulta counters and stuff like that. But then there are complex assays, rare event analysis, MRD assays, especially AML MRDs. They are not easy. They are difficult because creating gates on gates and stuff like that, I can tell you, most of us are, even today, we're still learning. So start slow. You have, good thing is NMC has made it mandatory. So great, at least every medical college will have a flow cytometer. Unlike our times when flow cytometer was something which was like, you know, a Taj Mahal that you had to go and look at. Today, it is going to be available everywhere. So people are going to be at least knowing what it is all about. You can start with simple assays like B27 or CD48 counts, which are very simple to do, and have the learning curve. Over 6 months to a year, I think most of people get kind of proficient with diagnostic flow cytometry, and then build on it and create your MRD assays and stuff like that. So give yourself time, at least 6 months to a year, but dedicated flow learning will be important. And of course, fall back upon TCS. TCS has these courses which are available online as well. And we also conduct workshops. When you set up your flow cytometry platforms, let us know. We will not charge you. We will come to your place. We will help train you and help train the people there. And you don't even have to pay for us. We will manage it on our own. I think that's something which we can offer from the TCS part of it for sure.
I'd like to invite Dr. Karl to felicitate Dr. Handu. Uh, Yeah, no. I'd like to invite Dr. Kanchan Gupta. Madam has been very kind to be our MMC observer for the event, and she's been there with us for the last 2 days. Uh, okay, Madam would like to say a few words. So,
it's my pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm very happy the way the program is conducted. Very informative lectures and very knowledgeable. And the company, of course, Sysmex has given big support. Thank you very much. Thank you.
for our next talk, platelet disorders remain a diagnostic challenge till today, often subtle, frequently underrecognized, but critically important in unexplained bleeding disorders. Accurate diagnosis requires clinical insight, but also deep understanding of platelet physiology and specialized lab testing. For our next talk, I would like to invite Dr. Prasanna Kumar to talk on functional platelet disorders, diagnosis, and challenges. Madam is a professor of pathology at PSG Institute of Medical Sciences and Research, Coimbatore. She's faculty for the 2 year Pediatric Oncology Fellowship Program in East Africa and a member of the Guidelines Development Group of the WHO, providing expertise in hematology for the review of corona vaccine safety data. She has multiple awards and publications in national and international journals, and her area of expertise lies in hematopathology and transfusion medicine. Welcome, ma'am.
Yes, your quality. This is a that's a good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So we come to the penultimate talk of the 2 days symposium, which I'm sure all of you have really enjoyed. I must thank Monisha, my dear friend, because you're responsible for having me here. And a big thank you to the Sysmex team also, because as everybody has said before me, we love speaking in Sysmex symposia. Functional platelet disorders, as our moderator was speaking about, is there's a huge world out there. And I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. I start with asking you, as a pathologist, when are you consulted for doing investigations for a thrombocytopenia? It's usually an unexplained mucocutaneous bleeding. It may be something more drastic, like an epistaxis, or it may be even a menorrhagia or sometimes a gastrointestinal bleeding. You have an index of suspicion when there is bleeding, but the platelet counts are kind of okay. They're more than 30,000. The patient should not be bleeding with a platelet count of even 10 to 30,000. Platelet counts which are unresponsible to typical treatments for an ITP. The patient has normal screening coagulation tests. There is a positive past history. There is a family history. In my part, I come from Tamil Nadu. There is a history of consanguinity. So whenever there's a history of consanguinity, we're thinking of autosomal recessive disorders. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, even if you don't have a history, it should not stop you from testing patients because you can have so many de novo mutations which take place. Just a small, how do I? It has to be over here, is it? Okay. Now, how do I advance? This one? Okay. Okay, fine. So a quick overview of what exactly takes place in primary hemostasis, the basic components. You know that when you have to have a platelet addition, you have important glycoproteins like glycoprotein 1V59. And then, of course, you have the von Willebrand's factor, which forms that bonding, the so-called bridge between the platelet glycoprotein receptors and the subendothelial collagen. Then, of course, you have the next step of platelet aggregation, where you have the GP2B 3A receptors. That's your alpha 2 beta 3 integrin, together with fibrinogen. And of course, all those products, those mediators, which come out of the alpha granules as well as the delta granules, which are responsible for primary hemostasis. Now, when you look at thrombocythemias or when you look at thrombocytopathias, you're looking at those thrombocythemias which affects the platelet membrane. For example, Bernard-Soulier, which is lack of adhesion because of problems with the GP1V9-5 receptors, or you can have a reduced response to collagen, in which case GP6 or GP1A2A are responsible, or you can have a platelet type 1 Willebrand's factor, in which you know that the platelets are exquisitely sensitive to combining with 1 Willebrand's factor, and you can have a Glanzmann's thrombocythemia. You go a little further, these are the ones which we commonly come across in clinical practice, but you go a little further, and if you have a high index of suspicion, you've ruled out a Bernard-Soulier, you've ruled out a Glanzmann's thrombocythemia, you have to go one step further and also think of, is there any problem with the alpha granules? I don't know how many of you in this audience have seen a gray platelet syndrome. Is there a problem with the cytoskeleton, the MYH9 disorders, which we talk about so much these days? The teeny weeny platelets, which may be present on a peripheral smear, which gives you a suspicion that this may be a Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. It may be enzymes. We're talking a lot about the cyclooxygenase pathway, the TX82, the TXB receptors, and so on and so forth, or any problems with the signaling pathway. So it's a whole world out there where thrombocytopathias are concerned. The basic diagnostic workup, it's not easy. There are so many lines of diagnostics that you have to go through. But basically, what are we all doing? Number one, bleeding time plus minus. A blood smear, a very, very good look. We are still morphologists at heart, and therefore it's very important that we look at the blood smear. And then we go on to something which I know it's by age, but I still have to talk about clot retraction because I think it's a very important test. Light transmission, or your LTA, with a limited number of agonists, and then you can go on to mode of agonists. And since Dr. Anil is over here, of course, flow cytometry and enzyme, etc. studies. So there's so many investigations you can do. It's important that you do your platelet counts. It's important that you look for macrothrombocytopenias. It's important that you look for any sort of neutrophil inclusions, which could give you an index of suspicion that you're dealing with some, leukocyte adhesion disorders or a Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome, etc., etc. There's no single test which is available. It is a combination of tests that you have to do for diagnosing a functional platelet disorder. The bleeding time, this is the British Parliament. It says A or nay. But anyway, I'm not going into go to the details, but you do know, of course, unless you have an excellent technologist to do bleeding time, it's a lot of work to standardize it, to reproduce it, and its sensitivity and specificity is not very good. But sometimes I still continue to do it when I have my best technician around. And whenever I do it, the most important thing that I do is when the bleeding time is being done on the volar aspect of the forearm, I ask my techs to take a smear from the wound of the bleeding time and stain it, put it under the microscope and look for agglutination, look for aggregation of the platelets. A very, very important indicator that I may not be dealing with a platelet aggregation disorder, because once you put it in EDTA, you know that the platelets deaggregate. So that's something which is very important. So this is a finger prick smear, and you find that the platelets are all clumped together. Now, going to the next part, what exactly is light transmission aggregometry? It's nothing but you have something called platelet-rich plasma. You phlebotomize the patient. You take the blood sample, and we'll talk about that. We use 800 RPM for about 5 minutes. So you get all the platelets on the top.
And then you also have another sample of platelet poor plasma. We use 4000 RPM for 15 minutes. You let a light pass through the platelet rich plasma. And when the platelets agglutinate or when they aggregate, you find that the transmission of light is much more than when it was a turbid solution. So it's a very, very simple principle which helps you to diagnose whether an agonist is working or not. So you have resting platelets, which are turbid, and clumped platelets, which are clear. You can make your PRP, you can make your PPP after you make your PRP, or you can make your platelet poor plasma from whole blood. It's lunchtime, so you have a whole lot of things over here, but aspirin, of course, is not one of them. And the reason I said this is I was just talking to Monisha during coffee time, and we said how integral it is for us to see that our patients come to us with a proper, what do you call it, a warning that I tell them to come on an empty stomach as far as possible. If it's somebody in the pediatric age group, I ask them to eat something like two idlis or two biscuits, nothing more than that. They have to avoid so many food items. They have to avoid milk and milk products, caffeine, garlic, turmeric, the whole works. They have to avoid drugs that can reversibly inhibit platelet function 3 days before, like your NSAIDs, or 10 days before you like your antiplatelet drugs. Remember, antiplatelet drugs act for a long, long time. And there's no smoking before the test. There's no exercise before the test, because all these things can influence your test quite a lot. So these would be your golden rules. Patients who are on, warfarins and vitamin K antagonists or direct thrombin inhibitors, diuretics, if you go into the British Society of Hematology protocol, you'll find that there's a whole page of drugs which one has to avoid before coming for a platelet function test. Even calcium channel blockers. I remember I had some very weird platelet function tests at one time, and then I found that the patient had been taking calcium channel blockers. Cephalosporins, importantly, tricyclic depressants. Patients, of course, who have been recently transfused, absolute no-no. And please don't ever do platelet function tests in patients who are in ICU. Though the clinician will sometimes beg you to do because he wants to know why the patient is bleeding. Because remember, all your metabolic acidosis, alkalosis, etc., can affect platelet function. Important pre-analyticals. Your patient should have rested. Your blood sample should have rested. Keep it on your workbench for at least 15 minutes. Some guidelines say even half an hour before you do your platelet function test. It's when, I don't know how many of you do transfusion medicine, but when we make single donor platelets also, we allow our platelets to rest for 1 hour before we actually issue them to the clinician. At room temperature for 30 minutes, you use a 21 or 22 gauge needle. You use evacuated tubes, and sometimes you might have very obese patients in whom the veins are very difficult, or even if they're not obese, there are people who have very deep veins. I ask my technicians to tie the tourniquet, to put in the needle. As soon as they insert the needle, release the tourniquet, and then take out the blood, because you don't want any sort of a mobilization of calcium to affect your platelet function test. Of course, you don't send the blood through the pneumatics. I never do platelet function tests unless the patient is in my department, and you don't use a tourniquet. There are certain rules about platelet function testing. There's a huge world out there regarding adjustment or not. If you have a platelet-rich plasma which has got more than 600,000 platelets, some people say that you should adjust, you should dilute it out with saline or platelet poor plasma. I personally don't practice that, and I've got reasonably good results. If you have patients who have thrombocytopenia, please do not hesitate to go ahead and do platelet function tests together with, if it's, at least 80,000, together with a control, which is a diluted sample to the same extent of platelet count. And always remember, your platelet testing should be completed within 4 hours, because your agonists deteriorate, your PRP deteriorates if it's more than 4 hours. Most of my experience in platelet function, though in the past I have used Chronolog, has been on this platform, which is the CS2400. Now we've got the CN3000. It's an integrated platelet aggregation platform where you have both clotting as well as platelet function. Many advantages, we'll talk about them regarding the volume, the platelet count, the fact that it's a walkaway technology, the turnaround times are pretty good, and comparable results. I haven't done them, but the literature says that they are comparable to the results that you get from the chronologue. I use the basic 5 agonists, that's ADP, collagen, epinephrine, ristocetin, and arachidonic acid. And we also, in every run, use a low dose ristocetin. Normally, we use 1.6 milligrams per ml, but we go down to zero 0.6 milligrams because you want to rule out a type 2 von Willebrand's disease. Generally, if you get an abnormality with a single agonist, it may be a false positive. Take it with a pinch of salt, except when you are suspecting, for example, a Bernard-Soulier syndrome or a collagen receptor defect. Otherwise, you will have to repeat your curves. I'm sorry, but I'm just recovering from an upper respiratory. Okie dokie. So now this is your classic biphasic aggregation curve that you get with the CS 2400. I'll just explain the components of the curve. So this is at 0 is when you're adding your agonist. You have a lag phase in collagen. The lag phase is much more pronounced when compared to the other agonists. You find there's a shape change, and you find the primary wave of aggregation, which is a reversible one. And this wave is in response to the agonist that you have added into the system. Now, subsequently, what happens is that the secondary mediators of aggregation come into focus, and you get your secondary wave of aggregation, which is irreversible, and then you do get your deaggregation, and we do it for a period of 600 seconds. So then you get the deaggregation at the bottom. So this is essentially the curve. And for those of you in this audience who are used to the chronologue, it's the opposite. It's ulta when compared to the chronologue. Whenever you do your platelet function test, always check that the patient does not have platelets which are spontaneously aggregating. So how do you do it? Take a vial with platelet-rich plasma, put it into the system without an agonist, or you could use saline, and you should get an absolutely flat wave like this way, which tells you that there's no spontaneous aggregation which is influencing your results. So having said this, ladies and gentlemen, I'll just go through a series of case histories of mine. Normal platelet counts and bleeding. So we have this 24-year-old female who had gum bleed since childhood, menorrhagia. She was on antifibrinolytics, transfusions, which I haven't spoken about the BAT score, but it gives you a pretty high BAT score of at least 5 or more. She was on tracks and treatment for infertility. She did have consanguineous parents, and her aunt passed away from a severe hemorrhage. Is she a bleeder? Yes. Is she a severe bleeder? Most likely. She's got a very high BAT score. Is it primary hemostasis, secondary hemostasis? Very difficult to say because you find there's a combination of both epistaxis as well as menorrhagia. Look at her prothrombin time. It was just marginally increased. It was 13 seconds, 13.8 rather. And because our lab normal was 12 upper limit, I just decided, because there was a history of bleeding, to do a correction. And when I did a correction, I got 11.1. And then I went on to do a factor 7, and I got a 38% factor 7 with all the other factors and the LFT being normal. I had a suspicion that this was not all, because for a factor 7 of 38%, this was too much of bleeding. I also did a clot retraction test. Call me fossilized, it doesn't matter, but it gives you a lot of information. And you can see very, very well that you've taken a tube with no anticoagulant. And you can see that on the left-hand side, there's a beautiful retraction of the clot. And on the right-hand side, there's no retraction of the clot. This is very typical of a Glanzmann's thrombasthenia, a Stormakin syndrome, and some of the other syndromes. So there was a discrepancy between the laboratory diagnosis and the severity of the bleeding. I was looking for an alternative diagnosis. These are the normal platelet function tests with the 5 agonists, which comes out in the CS 2400, the CS series. You have the ADP, the arachidonic acid, the ristocetin, the collagen, and the epinephrine. And this was, and I think it's a no-brainer. You can see that there was no aggregation with any of the agonists except with ristocetin, giving you a diagnosis. So call to action, always continue seeking answers. Don't take it for granted that you've reached a diagnosis. This was a diagnosis of a hereditary Glanzmann's thrombasthenia. Remember, she was born out of a consanguineous marriage. and with a factor 7 deficiency, a rare combination reported just once in the literature by Dr. Srimati Shetty from the KEM group. A complete diagnosis is absolutely essential for treatment, for carrier identification, etc. And this is obviously a combination of mutations in both the factor 7 gene as well as in the genes which are responsible for Glanzmann's thrombasthenia. Your treatment, of course, with the antifibrinolytics. Remember, desmopressin doesn't work very well in Glanzmann's thrombasthenia. You may go on to do things like giving recombinant factor 7, fresh frozen plasma because of the factor 7 deficiency if she bleeds, and of course, platelet transfusions plus or minus. Again, that's a huge topic because in Glanzmann's, you try to avoid platelets as far as possible because you don't want your patients to develop antibodies. My second case is a 10-year-old boy, non-consanguineous, ecchymotic patches in the upper arms which disappear spontaneously. A prolonged bleeding time. At one time, I was regularly doing bleeding times, no longer. Platelets were normal in count and morphology. The clot retraction was normal. The quads and fibrinogen, etc., were all normal. And you can see over here that there was normal aggregation with risto, arachidonic acid, ADP, as well as epinephrine. And we got a rock bottom curve where collagen was concerned. I did not have any supportive investigations to say that this is a collagen receptor defect. However, I gave the presumptive diagnosis that this is probably a deficiency of GP either 6 or 1A2A, giving rise to a decreased adhesion with collagen. Of course, this had to be confirmed with a flow cytometry. And we haven't yet started doing investigations on the flow for platelet function. My third case was a 22-year-old woman with severe PPH 3 months ago, one massive transfusion pack given, and she had a past history of epistaxis. Platelets normal, her coags were normal, but whenever coags are normal, for the younger people in this audience, please don't presume your patient doesn't have a coagulopathy. Always look at the von Willebrand factor. The von Willebrand factor was 27%, factor 8 was normal. When you're doing von Willebrand, you should simultaneously do factor 8 because, they both go hand in glove. Von Willebrand is a chaperone for factor 8, so to speak. Whenever you're doing von Willebrand, please do the blood group because there's a whole world out there regarding blood group O and low von Willebrand factors, and the Rickoff is not done. Now, when we looked at her curves, this is the curve with normal dose platelet function test with normal doses of the agonists. And you can see that there is aggregation with all the agonists, except where the arrow shows you that's ristocetin. We did a high dose ristocetin, and you find that the curve is flat. There's no exaggerated response with a high dose ristocetin. With a high dose ristocetin, there was no response. With a low dose ristocetin, there was no exaggerated response. And then I just wanted to do a mix because I'm in a teaching institute. So I just wanted to prove to my postgraduates that this is not a Bernard Soulier. This is most probably a von Willebrand. So for the heck of it, I did a mix and I found that it beautifully corrected with ristocetin. So why, ladies and gentlemen, do you use low dose ristocetin? This is known as the LD Reaper test because normally you find that normal PRP responds to normal ristocetin, does not respond to a low dose ristocetin, that's 0.6 milligrams per ml. If you look at von Willebrand type 1, 2A, 2M, you find that there's no response to normal as well as low concentrations as we saw over here. And if you look at 2B, whether it's 2B von Willebrand or whether it's a pseudoplatelet type 2B, which is a very, very rare diagnosis, you find there's an exaggerated response to low-dose ristocetin. So it kind of helps you in the absence of multimer analysis and all those things, at least to kind of slot your patient into a specific diagnosis. So the final diagnosis, ADP, collagen, epinephrine, arachidonic acid, normal aggregation, ristocetin markedly decreased, corrected with normal plasma, LD Reaper negative, von Willebrand's factor reduced, factor 8 normal, most probably quantitative, von Willebrand type 1 or qualitative type 2A or 2M. Remember, we didn't do Rickoff in this particular case. Am I okay with time? Okay. Case 4, 10-year-old child with bleeding from the mouth, plates and quads normal. Von Willebrand factor antigen was an irritating borderline 46% with a factor 8, which was normal, and the blood group was A positive. I was hoping it would be O positive, but it was A positive. normal concentrations of agonists. You see that there is aggregation with all the agonists, but there's a funny sort of an aggregation with ristocetin, where you can see a very very long lag phase, and you can see the maximum amplitude is normal. That's the prolonged lag phase. We did a high dose ristocetin. Whenever you have low, results with various agonists, always bump up the concentration of the agonist and repeat your testing. So when we did a high dose ristocetin, we got the same sort of a result with a very prolonged lag phase. When we did a low dose ristocetin to rule out a type 2B, it was negative. And when we did a mix, again, it was positive. We repeated this. It's expensive, but the patient was willing. So we repeated the testing and we got similar results. So there was normal aggregation with all the agonists except ristocetin, normal with a prolonged lag phase, corrected. I went on to do, because I presume that this may be a functional platelet disorder. I just went on to do, because the von Willebrand factor antigen was almost normal. And when I did a Ricoff, it was 14 international units per deciliter, which gives you a antigen Ricoff ratio of less than 0.6. And therefore, I've said query type 2 von Willebrand's disease. Now, this is one of my most intriguing cases which came in the last 1 month. A college going student with purpura, ecchymosis over the upper extremities and epistaxis. And you can see that very badly, hurt lips. And she had been given tranexamic acid, and she was on it off and on for 4 years. She had come to us actually 4 years ago, and we had done a complete coagulation workup, and it was normal. But at that time, they were not willing for platelet function tests. Her CBC coagulation profile, etc., everything was normal. She had gone to some other institution in Kerala, and they had worked her up for vasculitis, and they also did a ROTEM, which is your point of care coagulation investigation, and they found that this is the extem, that's a fibtem, and they found that everything was normal. But you do know, ladies and gentlemen, that at this point in time, point of care coagulation testing is not the best way to diagnose a thrombasthenia. She had with normal concentration PFT, you find that she had a normal response to ristocetin. She had a subnormal response to collagen with presence of primary as well as secondary waves. She had a response to ADP with no secondary wave, and she had a rock bottom response to arachidonic acid and epinephrine. When we repeated it with higher concentrations of the agonist, we found that it improved with collagen. It improved marginally with ADP, but again, you find that there's no secondary wave of aggregation. And when we did a mix, that's with platelet-rich plasma, obviously, we found that the whole thing improved. Your collagen improved, your arachidonic acid improved, the ADP improved with a nice secondary wave, and the epinephrine also improved. I was at my wit's end as to what this whole thing was about. And we asked her to come 3 days later, because she said she had taken Dolo on that Saturday. She came on Tuesday for her investigations, and I knew Dolo is not going to produce anything like this. So anyway, when we did a repeatability, we found that there was perfect repeatability. And I was so happy with the CS, because it gave me such a lot of confidence that twice when I was able to do repeatability and reproducibility, it was good. So you can see that most of the values are the same in the first run, in the increased concentration, when there was a mix. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm dealing with, but all I know is there's been an abnormal aggregation with 3 agonists, and she does have bleeding. There's a lack of secondary wave with ADP, which you see, in an aspirin associated more with arachidonic acid. And so I presume query, is this thromboxane A2 receptor defect? That's autosomal dominant, and I didn't get any family history. Is this a platelet storage pool defect? But anyway, she will need further investigations for a diagnosis. I spoke to the clinical hematologist, and she said, Prasanna, anyway, whatever it is, you've given me some sort of a diagnosis. I'll give her antifibrinolytics, and we'll just go with it. I have a couple of cases with decreased platelet counts and bleeding. A 42-year-old woman with epistaxis, menorrhagia, but she had an uneventful pregnancy. Please note that. She came to us because she was due for a DNC. She was on dapsone for 6 years because she had a diagnosis of immune thrombocytopenia. Her peripheral smear showed a macro thrombocytopenia with an automated count of 54,000, a smear count of roughly 80 to 90,000. Her quags and VWF were normal. Now, even though she had, this was my first challenging case. This was quite some few years ago, with low platelet counts and platelet function. And you can see that there is a little bit of aggregation with ADP, a little bit with collagen, arachidonic acid, as well as epinephrine. But if you go down to ristocetin, you find that it's gone below the baseline, below the x-axis. And therefore, I gave a diagnosis of a Bernard-Soulier syndrome. And of course, we needed flow to confirm this. My question was, why did she not bleed during pregnancy? Because pregnancy can be the worst surgical challenge that any woman goes through. And then when I went through the literature, I realized that just like your coagulation factors increase during pregnancy, platelets become terribly hyperactive during pregnancy. So that could have been the reason, in spite of the bleeding on other occasions, that this lady did not bleed during pregnancy. So again, macrothrombocytopenias and thrombocytopenias, there are challenges in doing your platelet function test. While preparing the PRP, remember that you have to make the large platelets go up. So what I've done is that I've decreased my RPMs to 600, and sometimes I also just allow the sample to sit down on the work table for about half an hour. The platelets come up, and then I get reasonably good curves. So to reduce the RPM or do a gravity separation, and always run a diluted sample. We've done a diluted sample with a similar platelet count. I don't dilute with platelet per plasma. I dilute with saline and then repeat it. Platelet counts and PRP, how low and how high can you go? This is how low we went. Somebody with a 53,000 count with a PRP of 129,000. And you see where we got very satisfactory curves. And I'm totally against diluting with platelet per plasma because I feel it interferes with the system. And therefore, without dilution, with a PRP of almost 10 lakhs, we have got some very nice curves. I think I'll skip case 7. Is there time? If there isn't, we'll skip it. Okay, let's skip it. This was actually, it was an acquired Landsman's with an MDS, but anyway. Okay, my last case, a 66-year-old male who came to me with bleeding from the mouth, thrombocytopenia with large platelets being investigated. He had a cabbage and he was an aspirin, and the hematologist wanted me to do a PFT for a baseline function. So when I did a PFT, this was the aspirin effect which I saw. You find that ADP is low, arachidonic acid is really very low. And when we repeated with a high doses, you found that the ADP improved, but the arachidonic acid. So there was an aspirin effect. We can talk lots about it, but not at this point. And therefore, we asked him to cut down his aspirin for 14 days and then come back to us. And when he came back to us after 14, 15 days, all his, his curves, all of them improved. So anyway, so that was just an aspirin effect, which I wanted to demonstrate to you. He didn't come for further analysis of his macrothrombocytopenia. So finally, advantages of integrated platelet aggregation testing will be the pre-sample volume. Totally for 5 agonists, you need just about 700 microliters of PRP versus in your chronolog where you need more. And I've done some in pediatric patients also. It's a big advantage in pediatric patients. And you can do it with decreased platelet counts. The reagents are terribly stable. And if you want to know about the stability of reagents, I won't talk about it in front of the Sysmex guys, but I'll talk about it later to all of you. I'll tell you how you can get stability because they're expensive. It's less operator dependent. You don't have to pipette and you don't have to do anything. You just put the whole thing onto that platform and then it does the work. You can just walk out. It's an open analytical system. So I was able to do so many things like mixes, etc. There's sufficient sample for repeat testing and your results are comparable to standalone aggregometers. Your turnaround time is low. However, there's always a glitch to it. There's variability between individuals, but I think this is in any platelet aggregation platform. Poor responses to adrenaline because it depends on the number of adrenocortical receptors which people have. So there can be so much of variation and low dose agonists. The LTA is not sensitive, obviously, to your secretion disorders like a delta SPD or a PSD. Many LTA abnormalities, like what I've shown you, may not even confirm to what your textbooks say. So you'll have to keep digging in and digging in and digging in and referring and try to find out your analysis. You may have non-specific abnormalities, which you may not be able to decipher. And you might get abnormalities even in healthy volunteers. For example, Malaysia has come out with a huge study of looking at 3,000 healthy blood donors, and they found that none of them responded to ADP, or they had very low responses to ADP. They were normal. So your clinical inputs are an absolute must. So finally, my wish list, I wish we had a single test which could diagnose all thrombasthenias. I wish that we could have an EQUAS program, but obviously the samples are so volatile that we cannot have an external quality review for, as of now, for platelet function testing. I wish physicians are aware of the fact that mucocutaneous bleedings and even larger bleeds could be due to platelet abnormalities. And I just wish they would complete their coagulation and Von Willebrand and hand over the patient for platelet function testing and assessment of antiplatelet therapy. Sysmex has come out with some beautiful scores. I haven't tried them out now. It's known as an ADP platelet aggregation limit and a collagen platelet aggregation limit, where you use two concentrations of the agonist and try to find out whether your patient is responding to aspirin or not. And genotyping, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is the future of diagnostics. So greetings from PSG Hospital. It's in Coimbatore. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, ma'am. I personally enjoyed the talk a lot because we deal with a lot of platelet function tests, and when we see the variability, it's sometimes difficult to answer the questions. Just one, any questions from the audience? Okay. I have one question, ma'am. When you're talking of doing a mix, you use the saline as a 1:1 ratio with the sample to them.
When you talk about the mix, I spoke about mixes with platelet poor plasma. And for bringing down platelet counts, I use saline as 1:1. I don't use platelet poor plasma. You're right. I use saline.
Thank you, ma'am. I would invite Dr. Karl to please come and felicitate Dr. Prasanna.
Wow.
So coming to the last lecture of the event, and it comes from a dear friend and colleague. She's talking about a diagnostic enigma which challenges us on an everyday basis in the lab, a topic on which even guidelines are yet to meet a consensus. So I'll invite Dr. Rucha Patil to talk about lupus anticoagulant and immediate inhibitor positivity in hemophilia A, the diagnostic challenge. Rucha is a scientist D in the Department of Hemostasis and Thrombosis, ICMR, National Institute of Immunohematology, in the Research Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in the Government of India. She has 20 plus publications in peer-reviewed journals and a few patents. She's a member of Indian Society of Hematology and Transfusion Medicine, appointed as Secretary of MHG, expert in NRDC National Awards, and has International Hemophilia Training Center in KEIM Hospital, ICMR National Institute of Immunohematology. Her areas of research include hemostasis and thrombosis, coagulation, cell-derived microparticles, development of point-of-care testing for coagulation tests and hematological disorders, and she's enrolled in many academic clinical trials. Welcome, Rucha.
So good afternoon. First, I would like to thank Sysmex team and the Hinduja team for inviting me to speak on this topic. And second, I do know I'm the person speaking and in between your growling stomach and food, so I'm going to keep it as short as I can. So today I'll be speaking on not lupus anticoagulant. To be very honest, I actually do not like that test because all of us know there are so many glitches and so many issues in testing for lupus anticoagulant. What I'm going to talk about is how lupus anticoagulant is a pain when it comes to coagulation studies and coagulation tests for our hemophilia patients. So I say this because, as she said, I'm a part of the one of the two internationally recognized hemophilia training centers, and that is why we see a maximum number of bleeding disorders. So our first priority is bleeding disorders. So since nobody spoke about hemophilia, just a gist. Hemophilia A is an X-linked recessive disorder. They do not produce the factor 8 and they can be classified into severe, moderate, mild hemophilia. The problem with them is they have a lot of bleeding. They have hemarthrosis, intracranial bleeds, hematuria. So the major issue is bleeding. The treatment is mainly factor 8 concentrates, but the problem with factor 8 concentrates is that 25 to 30% of our patients develop inhibitors. And this is the challenge. First of all, the challenge is in India, where there are many few laboratories actually testing for factor 8 inhibitors. And the second challenge is we have many non-specific inhibitors that interfere in these tests. I'm talking about lupus anticoagulant being one of them. Now, the thing with hemophilia is you do not need the laboratory assays only for the diagnosis. It's not a one time thing. They bleed, they have bleeds, they have surgeries. So, time to time, again in their life, n number of times, you have to do the coagulation assays for them. So, I know all of you, I'm going to be once upon a time and just putting a gist on how we diagnose and what are the tests used. And I know all of you are going to be like, oh no, I've heard it, but I'll be quick and fast. So, diagnosis of hemophilia, how is it done? A patient with very high bleeding score comes to us, the APT is prolonged. For example, 66.1 seconds. You do an immediate mix, it's correcting. You do factor 8 levels because this is the most prevalent, you get less reduced levels. You cannot give it as hemophilia yet. You have to rule out von Willebrand disease, either by platelet aggregation with ristocetin or VWF antigen levels. If both of them are low, it's a von Willebrand disease. If only factor 8 is reduced, there is when you can say, yes, this is a hemophilia A patient. Taking the same scenario ahead, you do a factor 8 levels and it comes normal. Then you do a factor 9 levels, it may be less than 1, and this is the patient with hemophilia B. The diagnosis is done. Not only that, APTT, PT, TT normal, and a bleeding history, especially dental bleeds. Over here, yes, you do your platelet aggregation, you do your factor 13 assays and fibrinogen, but you have to do factor 8 and factor 9 assays because we've seen mild hemophilias, the APTT is in the normal range. So do a factor 8, factor 9, you may catch the moderate, mild hemophilias. As I said, the issue in hand today is anti-hemophilic factors. They are efficient, they are safe. The problem is they are immunogenic. 25% of our patients develop inhibitors. And what is the problem with inhibitors is the patients suffer, but the government does too, because suddenly the treatment changes to factors, from factors to bypassing agents, which are 2.5 to 3 times higher in cost. And that is why you should really know whether your patients have true factor VIII inhibitors or not. Talking about the techniques for inhibitor detection, you have the incubated mixing test, the classical Bethesda assay, and the Nijmegen modified Bethesda. This is the maximum which is established in many of the laboratories. Other than that, the gold standard test is chromogenic Bethesda, ELISAs, and you can even do a factor recovery test, but this is done in very few laboratories. Now, I'm going to tell you just one in simple, a principle of all the tests. All the inhibitors have a mixing of the patient's plasma and a normal pool plasma. So the patient plasma has the inhibitors and the normal plasma has the factor VIII. And it is the capacity of the inhibitors to bind to the factor VIII provided by NPP and increase the clotting time, which results in your testing. All the tests have the same principle, that is mixing of the patient's plasma with a control. So this is the incubated 1 hour, 2 hour test. WFH guidelines say don't do it. We say do it, especially in LMICs, because there are no reagents required. You just need 3 tubes and you get the results. Problem with this test, lower titers are not caught. give it in the report. Say this is the test given, and you may be missing 5 Bethesda units and below, and go ahead doing this test. Bethesda assay over here, as I said, I'm not going to go to the principle, but it is a very complicated test. I believe no clinician likes this test because there are n number of tubes, n number of dilutions, and for each of the dilutions, you have to do a factor assay. It becomes expensive more so with an imagen modification because they have converted our buffer by using factor 8 deficient plasma, which is expensive, and you have to use a pH buffered normal pooled plasma. There is one more thing which I would like to stress over here, since there are many pathologists doing the test. You have to do the modification, that is the heating of the plasma at 56 at 30 minutes. Many people are not doing it. It is very important, and I'm just going to quickly tell you why it is important in a cartoon method. These patients are bleeders. So as soon as they bleed, they go to the nearest hospital. The clinicians may give them whole blood, FFP, factor 8, whatever is there. Now, these are the cartoon pictures and the symbols. The green dot is a factor 8 from the transfused product. The blue dot is factor 8 from NPP, and the patient has factor 8 inhibitors. So when the blood is drawn to do a factor 8 inhibitors, look at the drop. This is how his blood looks like. The inhibitors are already bound to the factor 8, which was given by in the transfused product. When you do the mixing studies in the tube, they are not free to bind to the factor 8 which you're giving by the control. So you're going to get false negative results. When you heat the plasma, what happens is all the factors are destroyed, and the only thing which is there are inhibitors. So please do the heating step before factor 8 assays. And factor 8 recovery test is the simplest test which we recommend in places where inhibitors are not being done. Tell your clinician to transfuse the patient with 20% after 1 hour, do a factor 8 assay, and the factor 8 should be 60% of what was transfused. If it is less, it may be inhibitors. If it is more, it is not inhibitors. Now coming to the topic in hand. So this is a known case of hemophilia A. You can see the patient's APDT is 88.9, the mix is 37.1 second. So what is this case? Why the immediate mixing is not correcting? So this may be a classical factor 8 inhibitor. Classical factor 8 inhibitors are time and temperature dependent. You see progressive inhibitions, and that is why all our tests have a 2-hour incubation period. Immediate mixing with NPP, you see minimal inhibition, as you can see 37.1. But I have another case right now. This is a known case of hemophilia. The patient's APDT is 88.9. The mix is 87.9. The immediate mix is completely inhibiting, that is correcting. So is this lupus anticoagulant or is this true factor 8 inhibitors? This is the dilemma which we face. If I think it is lupus anticoagulant, the clinician is going to keep giving factor 8, and if he actually has factor 8 inhibitors, it's the wrong treatment. If I assume it is factor 8 inhibitors, the government is going to waste bypassing agents when it was not required. A lot of money going for unnecessary. So immediate acting inhibitors are generally seen in patients with acquired hemophilia and with antiphospholipid antibodies like lupus anticoagulant. Congenital hemophilia patients, it's very rare or assumed to be rare. And when it comes to factor 8 inhibitor test, if you do the normal test, the Bethesda, the incubated mix test, you're going to get everything false. Not only that, go ahead. Don't only stick to a known case of hemophilia A, do factor 8 and factor 9. You are going to get less than 1% in both the patients. This is going to confuse you completely. So the main question is in hand is, are these lupus anticoagulant or are these true factor 8 inhibitors? This is very important because the treatment completely relies on this question. So we did a study to assess the role of lupus anticoagulant in immediate acting inhibitor positivity in hemophilia A patients. And the tests which we did was, we did all the factor 8 inhibitor tests. We did the incubated mix test, the Bethesda, in-house ELISA, chromogenic assay, and the recovery. For lupus anticoagulant, we stuck to the basics. We have not done more than that. We have used an LA-sensitive APDT silica-based low phospholipid, a high phospholipid for confirming it, a DRVVT screen and confirm, and very important, we again repeated the test after 12 weeks. Those patients after 12 weeks, which again was positive, we have considered LA positive. Now, all this is available in the Sysmex. So, in one machine, you can run for hemophilia patients all of this. You can check for LA. At the same time, you can check for factor VIII activity, the chromogenic test for inhibitors. So, it is one machine which can give you the diagnosis whether it is LA or inhibitors. So, coming to the results, we screened 4,900 hemophilia A patients, out of which 451 patients were inhibitor positive. Now, classical inhibitors were in 398, and I just want to, we are not going to talk about the classical factor VIII, but 4.7% of those patients were LA positive. Now, coming to the immediate acting inhibitors, 53 were immediate acting inhibitors, and I want you to concentrate. 27 of them had both factor VIII and factor IX less than 1. These were all reported to be hemophilia A patients, which we included. When we did the proper ELISA and chromogenic assay, we realized 5 of them were hemophilia Bs who were always given factor VIII concentrates. These were false. This is because all of these 5 hemophilia B were very strong LA positive. Coming to our hemophilia A cohort, 87.5% of these patients were LA positive. And you can see the 3 groups which we've divided it into. We got one group where there were only lupus anticoagulant, no factor VIII inhibitors. I'll tell you the sad part is these 4 patients were given for 1 year bypassing agents. So you can see the loss of money which went because they were falsely labeled as factor VIII inhibitors. Then we had a group which had a mixture of lupus anticoagulant and factor VIII inhibitors, and the group 3 only factor VIII inhibitors. So I will concentrate on the tests for these 3 groups. For all these 3 groups, APDT was deranged and the mixing was immediately inhibiting. LA was positive in the right places, that is, group 1 and group 2 were LA positive, group 3 was negative. The 2-hour incubated mixed screen, absolutely do not do it for such patients. You are getting negative results. The factor VIII Bethesda Nijmegen, you're getting non-linear readings for all the 3 groups. Do not do it. The only assays which gave us perfect results were the ELISAs and the glucogenic assay. When I tell you that the Bethesda assay is non-linear, what does it mean? So this is how the textbook Bethesda results are seen. That is, it is that dilution which actually results in NPP or a control of 100% reaching 50% is your titer. So as you do the factor assays with your dilutions, the factor assay is supposed to increase. In these patients, look at the last box, it just continuously comes less than 1 no matter what dilution you use. So that is why you cannot do a Bethesda in these assays. So what is the approach for our patients with immediate acting inhibitors? If it is a new case, never diagnosed case, you get APDT deranged, and mixing is also meaning absolutely inhibition, that is 65 seconds. You do your aggregation, ristocetin, rule out VWD, that's fine. Do a factor VIII levels less than 1. Do not give the diagnosis of hemophilia A with inhibitors. Trust me, go ahead with factor IX and lupus anticoagulant. You'll get factor IX less than 1 and you'll get lupus anticoagulant as a strong positive. What do you do in such patients? One way to do it is factor assays. We all know you have to do dilutions 1:5, 1:10. Increase the dilutions. Do 1:20, 1:40. What happens there is you will not get factor IX as normal, but at least factor VIII remains less than 1. Factor IX will come a little above 30%, 20%. You know what the patient is truly is. He is a factor VIII. If you do not trust these results, wait for some time. Try it after 12 weeks and 4 weeks. Check the family history, see whether there's another index case in the family and do his testing. So that is another way of going about. For a known case of hemophilia whose correcting does not at all mixing does not correct, do not do incubated mix test, do not do Bethesda, you're wasting money. Directly, you have to do a chromogenic or an ELISA. Very sorry to say there is no other option, otherwise you're giving false results. So, since we are a research institute, we looked into the clinical aspect. That is, what do these patients with immediate acting inhibitors have, which is different from the other patients? The only thing which we noticed was majority had a lot of surgeries. They were transfused a lot. Majority had multiple IC bleeds. And the most interesting aspect is we started getting many patients with immediate acting inhibitors, and all of them were on immune tolerance induction. Immune tolerance induction is where you keep giving factor VIII so that your immune system recognizes the factor VIII and it eradicates the inhibitors. So this was an interesting result, which I'll show you later. So this study, the findings emphasize that you do have immediate acting inhibitors in congenital hemophilia A patients also. Ruling out lupus anticoagulant is very, very important in such hemophilia patients. 87.5% of these patients were lupus anticoagulant. And the most disastrous thing is possibility of misdiagnosis when lupus anticoagulant is involved. You cannot do the normal test. You have to do an ELISA or the chromogenic assay. So talking about further research and further studies, we did not stop over here. We decided let's do the IgG subclass in these patients and see whether we get something different. So what is already known is the high titer factor VIIIs have IgG4 and the low titers are generally IgG1. We took different cohorts, healthy controls, lupus anticoagulant positive. These are patients who are not hemophilia, just lupus anticoagulant positive, inhibitor negative, low titer, high titer, immediate acting, and very interesting thing, we don't know why we took it, but we took acquired hemophilia patients too. And what we found was something very interesting. Immediate acting inhibitors in congenital hemophilia patients showed a similar profile to acquired hemophilia, that is an IgG2 and IgG4. So the clinicians thought if this is true, maybe immunosuppression may be beneficial in such patients. So, how did we go ahead with this data? As I said, immune tolerance induction is there. It is very advantageous because this is the only treatment where you can eradicate the inhibitor, but it is very demanding for the patients and the parents because they have to keep coming every alternate day for taking the factors. And as I said, out of 20 patients, 10 of the patients have developed immediate acting inhibitors during the course of ITI. So what did we do? We did a small study. We took 20 patients and we gave them low dose immune tolerance induction. 10 was successful. It led to eradication and they were shifted to factor VIII prophylaxis. 10, no reduction after 2 years. So over there, we decided 2 years, we are giving a lot of factors, we have to stop it. So the total success rate was 50%. For the 10 patients who showed persistent factor VIII inhibitors, 5 of them who had multiple breakthrough bleeds, we put them on low dose emicizumab prophylaxis. In the remaining 5, we added rituximab. We said, let's just try it out and let's give additional rituximab to these patients. Out of 5, 4 of them became negative. 1 of them relapsed. So a total 3 patients were more successful. Total success rate shifting from 50 to 70%. We did the immunoglobulin profile also. You can see first they are time and temperature dependent inhibitors. They suddenly change into the immediate acting inhibitors. At this point, rituximab was given, and then they converted again into time and temperature dependent and they became negative. So we even did the B cell immunophenotyping later on to see when they get back their B cells because this is a problem with rituximab. So we were monitoring them. So the preliminary results just showed us that the immediate acting inhibitor showed a very similar profile of acquired inhibitors. So could it be a marker to decide rituximab and monitoring of immune tolerance induction? Now, sadly, we got the funding for this from ICMR. We got WFH to give us all the factors ready to do this clinical trial. But we all know now what has come in the market, and it is so beautiful that is non-factor therapy. So no patient wants to go on immune tolerance induction. But I just thought these were interesting results which could be shared. So I end it with a few, this should come in the start, but I thought I'll end it with how everyone is suffering with this dilemma. That is, you can see a beautiful paper by Blanco. He did classical study in 170 hemophilia A patients, and only 7 of them had true anti-factor VIII inhibitors. 18 had LA, but they were considered as factor VIII inhibitors. So here is where the clinician is going to give PIVA and bypassing and waste the funds for the same. Similarly, there is another paper which showed that only chromogenic assay and ELISA will help you in such patients. So please use that. Do not use the Bethesda because they are the ones giving false results when LA is involved. The third paper even shows the same thing, false positive Bethesda values when you have immediate acting inhibitors. So to conclude, lupus anticoagulant frequently mimics immediate acting factor VIII inhibitors, and that is why it is very essential to discriminate both of them. You have the Sysmex integrated testing where all is there, chromogenic assay is there, LA is done. So it can be solved using that machine. It is very important to distinguish LA and true factor VIII inhibitors, more important for the treatment. And to end it, we have also contributed in solving this problem. So, just two technologies which I would like to highlight. ICMR NIH developed point of care test. Now, the principle behind this is antigen antibody, and that is why LA does not interfere, emicizumab does not interfere. So, this too in rural areas is our target, can be used to for this dilemma and for others too. So this is one of the kits which we launched. It is with Bud Biotech. It is like a pregnancy kit. All you have to do is put a blood drop, and the cutoff is 5%. So if you have patients with factor VIII, 5% and below, you're not going to get a test line. Similarly, it's for VWF antigen. If you have patients who have VWF antigen 5 and below, you're not going to get test line. So this is going to be a screening assay, especially for rural areas, etc. Lupus anticoagulant does not interfere. I'm very happy to share that another point of care test has recently been patented and it will soon be in the market. We have found our industrial partner. February, we'll be transferring it to them. So we have done for the same for factor VIII inhibitors. Just put a drop of the hemophilia patient. 5 Bethesda and above will give you a test line. 5 Bethesda and below will not. So with this, in the rural areas, we are hoping that at least the basic tests will be covered. And I end my talk by saying I think all of this is doable only when the clinician and the laboratory people work together. I am very blessed to be working with all beautiful clinicians who give all data to us where we can do the right test, etc. And thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
Yes. So the chromogenic assay on Sysmex as well as ACL top, okay, it works on all. The only thing is I would recommend right now using the bovine because it works well with emicizumab, etc. So if you're establishing it, take the bovine reagents.
And what for the ELISA assay? That is
ELISA is an in-house assay. The ones which you get, I think, is very expensive, so not doable again. But we've published it. Anyone who wants to can. It's like a 2-day process where put factor VIII concentrates and etc.
they will not work for this because these are emergency. I mean, like
Exactly. So this
30,
we
has to be quick.
batches come from different states and collected samples of 100 patients when we have to do. What time it works?
So it's okay, fine. The chromogenic is easy, like just a once
Per day,
thing.
yes.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Thanks.
We are all spending like 2 hours in the test, and we are going to give
Inhibitor screen in 5 minutes. I think it's a very great thing. So I wanted to congratulate
Thank
you
you.
for this work, and that's really great because we are all doing the mixing, keeping it for 2 hours, and then the immediate mix of the kept and seeing the difference.
Plasma right now, once we transfer it to the company, they'll do the blood part. So don't worry. It will be a prick, blood, etc. We expect the company to do it.
Directly. In the point of care, there's no heating.
Point of care, no need because it's antigen antibody. Yeah. The heating procedure, right? What about that? Sorry. Yeah. Yes, we do heat at 5630 each and every.
Plasma.
Plasma.
After you separated the PPP,
Yeah,
that's heated to destroy the factor VIII so that it does not interfere.
Thank you, Dr. Rucha. It's always exciting to hear you. Always is everywhere. So the question is about this. It was a very beautiful topic about the inhibitor. So we have a case right now. I mean, in the center, she's a 40-year female, and she is to be going operated for some surgery. So he was investigated. Basic coagulogram was done. So all APTT is deranged. It is 80 seconds, and we have done all the factor assays. They're all within normal limits. So, do you suggest me to do we have asked for the mixing studies also.
Okay.
So, just my point is that whenever you get immediate inhibitor, because they are time and temperature dependent. So, if the inhibition is immediate, do you think that we should just our mind should go towards lupus?
If everything, so if that person has a very strong bleeding profile, it has to be lupus and factor assays simultaneously. If there is no bleeding history, yes, go directly for lupus or factor 12. So as soon as a patient with no bleeding comes an APTT range, we do a factor 12 and a lupus.
All factor assays are okay, and now if mixing is doesn't the correct.
Hmm.
If the mixing,
Lupus and anticoagulant.
so we have to go for
Yeah.
the lupus.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I go?
So I'd like to invite Mr. Oto-san to come on the stage and felicitate Dr. Rucha Patil.
Thank you, Doctor. We would also like to felicitate Dr. Vidisha Mahajan for wonderfully moderating the entire day's session. I would request Oto-san to kindly felicitate Dr. Vidisha Mahajan. Dr. Vidisha Mahajan. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Oto-san. Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. With this, we come to the conclusion of day two and the third Sysmex India Scientific Seminar 2026. Over the past 2 days, we have witnessed insightful discussions, meaningful exchanges on the latest advancements in diagnostics and healthcare innovation. As Sysmex continues on its growth journey, we remain committed to advancing healthcare through innovation, people, and sustainable practices, ensuring a better diagnostic future. Thank you for your active participation, thoughtful questions, and collaborative spirit. Your commitment to scientific excellence makes such forums truly impactful. My sincere thanks to all the dignitaries, speakers, moderators, participants from all across, and our virtual audience. Wishing you a safe journey back home. Thank you. Dhanyavad. Sayonara. Thank you. Please join us for lunch, and your travel has been arranged. You may kindly contact the checkout counter. They'll be able to help you out there. Thank you and see you soon.